Hey everyone, I just want to say a huge thank you to all of you for helping me reach 100 subscribers. I honestly couldn't have done this without your love, support, and constant encouragement. Every like, comment, and subscribe means a lot to me. Now let's keep this journey going. Our next target is 200 subscribers, and I know we can do it together. If you enjoy my content, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Let's grow as a family. Thank you once again.
Luffy was supposed to be broken. Years of marine captivity were meant to crush his spirit, erase his dream, and silence the name of D. But they made one fatal mistake. They let him survive. Now free, Luffy sets sail not as a carefree boy chasing adventure, but as a captain carrying scars no one sees. The world thinks they know Monkey D. Luffy. They don't. He's building something bigger this time, a crew strong enough to rival Whitebeard himself. And when the Marines finally face him again, they'll realize the truth. They didn't stop the Pirate King. They created him. Disclaimer. This story do not belong to me. The author is This Captain Wears Red by OPWonders, respect to author.
Chapter 1, Romance Dawn. Luffy, a newly 17-year-old teen, was smiling brightly as he lounged in his tiny rowboat. Really, it was just a small dinghy, but he wouldn't have it any other way. Taking a bite from his apple, he watched as the few small clouds above him slowly drifted past him. He'd lived a relatively crazy life so far, from being kidnapped at age 7, held captive in a facility that tested on children daily for an entire 7 years, being freed and finding the Whitebeard pirates, joining the crew, and going on many adventures with them as their family. It was more than most could say they'd done in a lifetime, and honestly, most wouldn't want to be involved in the things Luffy had gone through. Now, he was setting off on his own to build a crew that would rival not only Whitebeard's, but Shanks as well, and then the entire world in his pursuit to become the Pirate King. He didn't want many crew members. As much as he loved all of his brothers and sisters back on the Moby, it was too large for him. He wanted a small crew, maybe 10 members that would be close, if not closer, than the Whitebeards were. His smile widened at the thought, and he tossed the apple core in his hand into the ocean, moving to grab another from the barrel that had been full of them at the start of his journey. When his hand felt nothing but air, he pouted but shrugged. Oh well, he'd just have to find an island or something if he wanted more food. That wasn't going to be an option though, as he looked ahead and saw a giant whirlpool in his path. His pout turned to a frown as he thought, "Won't do me any good dying now, I've only just started my journey." He mumbled to himself, almost turning red with exertion as he tried thinking of a solution to his new issue. His eyes scanned over the things he had with him, and he grinned when he saw the empty barrel. Laughing to himself, he grabbed his bag and hopped into the barrel, holding the bag to his chest and closing the lid above him. It sure was dark in this barrel. Within seconds he was falling asleep, completely unconcerned by the imminent danger he was in. // backslash slash 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 backslash. Dreaming of meat and his family on the Moby, Luffy slept peacefully, unaware of the sharp movements his barrel was making as it as well as his dinghy were pulled into the whirlpool. If anything, the movement soothed Luffy into sleeping deeper, only reminded of the storms that would happen back on the Moby, and even those he was able to sleep through just fine unless he was needed. Eventually, his barrel was spat out and the rough movement stopped, replaced by only the soft bobbing of the waves carrying him along. He still didn't wake though, and when there was more movement, rough like the whirlpool, he snored, undisturbed. A pulling motion was felt, but again, Luffy slept on, and then a feeling as if the barrel was being risen. A thunk, as if it had been set down on hard ground, and then a rolling, the barrel moving once more. And yet, he continued to sleep. There was noise around him now, people talking, and his barrel was being lifted again and placed upright, and finally, he woke up. There was still a noise around him, people talking, and he could feel emotions, as well as sense 4 people with his haki. One of the people was scared, nervous, anxious, worried, and overall just a mixture of bad feelings that Luffy didn't enjoy, so he promptly pushed those feelings away. The other 3 in the room were confident, happy, and fired up about something. Deciding now was as good a time as any to leave his barrel, he stood, stretching and yawning as he did. Consequently, the barrel splintered open at his strength and he was able to stand to his full height, arms stretching maybe just a smidgen too far for a normal human. Well, it was a good thing that Luffy wasn't a normal human. Ah, that was a good nap. He called out with a smile, lowering his arms now as he took in the scene before him. On the ground, one of the guys was knocked out, a red mark on his face. 2 others stood over him, eyes wide, one of them sweating and the other's jaw dropped in shock. There was a smaller guy with pink hair off to the side, looking equally as shocked as the other 2. "Who are you guys?" Luffy asked in confusion, wondering where he was and how he'd gotten there. "No, who are you?" The 2 standing over the unconscious guy yelled, looking both angry and shocked at the same time. That guy's gonna catch a cold if he sleeps there, you know, Luffy told them as he stepped out of the barrel, ignoring the earlier question completely as he did. You did that. The two said now, Luffy feeling as the blonde's anger increased and the darker-haired one began to feel more dismayed than angry. Suddenly, the emotions shifted again, determination filling the two, and just as Luffy was about to step completely out of the barrel, a sword was in front of him, stopping him. Are you toying with us even when you know we're pirates? The dark-haired one asked, still sweating, but determined. Luffy didn't even bother to address the two despite their determination and turned to the pink-haired kid, the only one who hadn't said anything yet. With how aggressive the other two were, Luffy felt that he might actually get answers from the nervous kid instead of them. Man, I'm hungry. You got any food? He asked him, the boy's shock and fear rising as Luffy asked. Listen when people are talking. The dark-haired man screamed in annoyance behind him. The anger in the blonde rose again, and Luffy tilted his head slightly, already knowing what the two behind him were preparing. You damn kid, the blonde shouted, both he and the dark-haired man raising their weapons. Turning his head, Luffy wasn't worried as the weapons began to lower towards him. Die! The blonde shrieked, he and his friend slashing their swords down swiftly, the pink-haired boy crying out and covering his eyes. Before the swords could even touch him, Luffy used his armament haki to strengthen his hands, stopping the swords with it. With a clang the tips came flying off and sticking into the wood of the ceiling, the two pirates falling to the ground in shock. What's the big idea? Luffy asked. He hadn't really been paying attention to what was happening, he was too hungry for that, but that didn't mean these two had to fight him about it. Who are you? One of the men stammered. Me, I'm Monkey D. Luffy. Nice to meet ya, Luffy exclaimed cheerily, despite the fact that these two had attacked him moments ago. With that, the two pirates both stood, grabbing the unconscious man on the ground and running out of the room in record time. Luffy watched them go in confusion, a small frown on his face as he did. What just happened? The boy behind him asked, shock still rolling off of him. What's with them? Luffy asked, still wondering what had happened. He knew it had been a while since he'd been in the East Blue, but were people always this strange? Run, hurry. If they come back with their friends, you'll be killed. The pink-haired kid practically screamed with this realization, Luffy turning his head to listen. He could still feel the kid's shock, and now the kid's fear as well, but he couldn't figure out why he felt that way. Everything was fine so far, and it wasn't Luffy that was scaring the kid, it was something else, but he just couldn't figure out what. But man, I sure am hungry. Luffy said instead, deciding that the best course of action was to fill his stomach before trying to figure out the kid's emotions. How can you be so carefree? The kid asked in shock, his worry now increasing as he spoke. There are still lots more of them up on deck. He continued, Luffy turning to look back at the door the others had left from. Shrugging, he turned towards two double doors and attempted walking towards them. Attempted, because the kid grabbed onto his arm immediately, trying to pull him out the other way. Come on, this way. Hey, not this way. Luffy ignored the kid completely now, smelling what he knew to be food on the other side of the doors. Opening them, he stepped in, slamming them behind him and briefly noting that the kid was caught in them, shrieking in pain. Again, he ignored this, more focused on the food he could both smell, and now see below him. Food, yes, food, Luffy cheered, jumping down and looking around at the array of boxes and bags filled with good-smelling food. Actually, they might not find us in here. Luffy barely heard the boy's words, still more focused on the important business. Food, which should I choose? This box smells good. Ooh, jackpot. Luffy cheered again as he opened the box to find it filled with fruit. These look great, he said as he picked some up, smiling widely before tossing them into his mouth two at a time. My name is Kobe. You're Luffy-san, right? The kid, Kobe, asked from where he stood at the door. That was incredible just now. How did you do that? Kobe asked as he began heading towards Luffy. These things are great, Luffy said, disregarding Kobe's words entirely as he turned to look at the boy, fruit in hand and smile on his face. Turning back to the fruit, Luffy thought of something. Is this a pirate ship? He asked, remembering both the fact that he didn't know where he was and that the man earlier had said they were pirates. No, it's a passenger ship that's being raided by Alvida-sama, Kobe said, kneeling behind him now as Luffy continued eating from the box of fruit. Well, it doesn't matter, Luffy said, not recognizing a pirate named Alvida. He hadn't paid much attention to upcoming pirates back on the Moby, he left that up to everyone else, so it didn't surprise him that he didn't know this Alvida person. Do you know if there are any boats on board? Luffy asked next, thinking back to the fact that he'd lost his earlier one. Too bad it had been a birthday present. I think so, Kobe said behind him, unsure of himself. My ship got swallowed by this giant whirlpool. You mean that whirlpool? No one could survive that. Kobe shouted, interrupting Luffy. The straw-hatted teen laughed at that, turning again to look at Kobe. Boy, was that a real surprise. Luffy laughed, thinking back to his encounter with the turbulent water. Are you one of those pirates, too? He asked now, wondering if Kobe had been a passenger or a pirate. It was on that fateful day. Kobe began somberly, immediately launching into his story, Luffy watching blankly as he continued eating. As Kobe told him about how he'd come to be a part of Alvida's crew, Luffy listened, feeling the boy's fear and nervousness slowly dissipate as he spoke. It's been 2 years since. In exchange for my life, I've been forced to be a chore boy. The kid finished, hands on his knees as he stared at the ground. Man, you're dumb and stupid. Luffy deadpanned, wondering how Kobe had managed to get himself in this position and why he was still here 2 years later. You're brutally honest, Kobe said in dismay. If you don't like it, then run away. Luffy said as if it were obvious. He had brief flashes of being trapped in the facility, but he forced himself not to think about that.
Yo, quick pause, smash that like button, hit subscribe if you're new here, share this video, and tell me in the comments which part you're loving the most.
He wasn't able to stop himself from glancing at his wrist, his number staring back at him in bold black ink. I can't. No way. No way. Just the thought of Alvida-sama finding me, frightens me and makes me weak in the knees, Kobe said, only snapping Luffy's attention to him momentarily until Luffy began thinking of Haru, and how scared he'd been when he got out that the doctor was going to get him. He was tempted to call Kobe weak, tell him that he didn't like weak people who didn't even try to stand up for themselves, but it was harder than it should have been. If you really hate it so much, you'll leave, no matter what, Luffy told Kobe instead, frown on his face and voice low. Kobe blinked at Luffy's sudden change in attitude, looking to the teen and noticing the frown on his face, an unidentifiable emotion in his eyes. Looking back down to the ground, Kobe smiled weakly, eyebrows slanted. Why yeah, you're right. If only I had the courage to drift the ocean in a barrel, there's actually something I want to do, too. Kobe said softly, breaking Luffy from his memories, remembering what whiskey taught him about breathing and reminding himself he was no longer at the facility, no longer had to worry about Haru. What compelled you to set out onto the sea, Luffy-san? Kobe asked, looking back up at Luffy. Happy that the subject was changed, Luffy smiled widely again, remembering his dream and everyone he'd made a promise to. I'm gonna be the king of the pirates. Luffy exclaimed loudly, proud of himself. Kobe's jaw dropped again and the shock Luffy had thought was finally gone was back. KK king of the pirates. Kobe squeaked out, sweating furiously. Yep, are you serious? Yeah, wait, you're a pirate Luffy-san. Yep, what about your crew? Don't got one, I'm just about to look for one. Luffy replied, answering all of Kobe's questions diligently, smile never leaving his face and Kobe's shock never dimming. If anything, it grew. Luffy blinked, confusion forming on his face as he watched the boy who was sat completely still, sweating and jaw hanging, not moving. Waving his hand in front of Kobe's face, Luffy waited for the boy to do something. KK King of the Pirates is the title given to the person who obtains everything in this world. That means seeking the great treasure of wealth, fame and power, the One Piece. Kobe exclaimed, standing and spreading his arms out as Luffy nodded along, agreeing with the boy's words. Yup, pirates all over the world are after that treasure. Me too. No way, no way, no way, no way. Absolutely no way. There's no way you can stand at the apex of this great pirate era. No way, no way. Annoyed now, Luffy knocked Kobe on the head, the boy falling to the ground as a result. Why did you hit me? Kobe whimpered out, holding his head. Just because, Luffy answered simply, wondering if Kobe was going to stop now. But it's alright, I'm used to it now. Kobe said, and again, Luffy could feel that pull in his mind, the one telling him that the facility was never going to leave, that one day, he would be strapped to a chair, needles poking into his arms and scalpels cutting him open. It's not about whether I can or not, Luffy said instead, not letting himself dwell on those thoughts anymore. I'm gonna do it because I want to. He said, grabbing his hat and taking it off his head, holding it in front of him and staring at it while Kobe watched from the ground. I've decided to be the king of the pirates, so if I die fighting for that, that's fine with me. Luffy said, voice soft yet confident as he spoke. There was a moment of silence as Luffy stared at his hat and Kobe stared at Luffy, but eventually, Luffy placed his hat back on his head and began walking to the ladder. Now, then, my belly's full, guess I'll go get me a boat. Luffy said, a boat being his next priority after food. After all, how was he supposed to have a crew and sail the ocean without a boat? I wonder if they'll give me one if I ask. Hopefully, they're generous. Luffy mumbled to himself, unaware that Kobe was still kneeling on the ground behind him. I never once thought about it. Do you suppose I can do it too? If I'm prepared to die for it? Kobe asked quietly, Luffy stopping at the top of the ladder to look back down at Kobe. Do what? He asked, not sure what they were talking about now. Do you think, even I could join the Navy? Kobe asked, making Luffy frown. Navy? He asked, more to himself. Everything he knew about the Navy the Marines had been from what he'd heard his brothers say back on the Moby. The Navy was responsible for the facilities, allowed them to continue existing, but his grandfather was a Marine, and he was a good guy, if not scary. Luffy knew not every marine was horrible and corrupt, just like he now knew not all doctors were mean and greedy, but it was still jarring for someone like Kobe, someone innocent with a bright blue aura, to want to join those corrupt bastards Luffy had grown up to dislike. Yes, catching bad guys is my dream. It's been my dream ever since I was little. Do you think I can do it? Kobe asked, standing and turning to look at Luffy, tears in his eyes and fist held up in determination. Luffy looked at the boy for a minute, a small smile forming on his face as he took him in, emotions and all. From what he could see and feel, Kobe truly wanted to be a good person, wanted to help the world, unlike some of the worst Marines. It showed Luffy that he was right in his decision of Kobe, that the boy was a good person and would probably continue to be that way see through the corruption. How should I know? Luffy finally said, still smiling to Kobe as he did. No, I'll do it. If I'm gonna be a chore boy for the rest of my life, then I'll break out of here and catch even Alvida-sama no, Alvida. Kobe continued shouting in determination, Luffy liking what he was hearing. Of course, it was disrupted by the ceiling crashing in on them, scaring Kobe who had made his way to the ladder in his shouting, and surprising Luffy as he watched the wood and dust fall down into the hole. You're gonna team up with him to catch who? A voice asked in rage. Luffy noted that there was a person in front of him, not because he could see them there was too much dust for that to be possible but rather he could feel their presence with his haki as well as their emotions. Huh, Kobe? The voice asked, and Luffy could see Kobe cowering in the corner of the hole where he stood, shaking. Luffy leaned forward a bit to get a better view, and as he did swords came poking out of the wall behind him, missing him. The dust cleared and there was a large person standing there, their attention turning to Luffy who stared back at them, undeterred. You don't seem to be Zoro, the pirate hunter. The person said with a grin. Zoro? Luffy asked, not sure who that was. Kobe stood up straighter at the name but said nothing. Kobe. At the sound of his name, Kobe screamed out in surprise, stiffening. Who's the most beautiful of all on these seas? The person asked loudly, Luffy only blinking as he watched. He could feel Kobe's nervousness and fear rise as the boy began sweating, smiling shakily and rubbing the back of his head. Oh of course, that would be. Who's the big chunky lady? Luffy asked instead, pointing to the person in front of him as he looked to Kobe in confusion. Everyone blanched in shock at his words, but Luffy didn't understand why. It was a valid question. Chunky. Not good. From above them two people with swords watched the conversation, looking into the hole the woman had created when she came down. Luffy could feel a fury rise in the person in front of him, drawing his attention and forcing him to focus on keeping the emotions out, not wanting them to influence him. He didn't know why they were getting so angry, but he didn't want to get angry back and most likely wreck the ship as a result. You runt. The person shouted in anger, raising their weapon high in the air above Luffy and swinging it down right where he stood. Before it could hit him, Luffy jumped away, landing in front of Kobe. Let's go, he told the boy, grabbing his hand and jumping upwards, out through the hole in the ceiling and taking Kobe with him. There were people there, pirates, that moved out of his way, giving him space to land. One hand on his hat and the other holding Kobe, he grinned to the pirates, daring them to try something. It seemed to work, a big burly guy with a sword growling as he began charging forward. Why, you, they shouted, swinging at Luffy, but due to his flexibility, the rubber boy leaned back, allowing the sword to glide over him instead. Being in motion already, Luffy pushed his weight forward, headbutting the pirate to the ground and turning just as another pirate came at him, swinging their sword at his back. He punched them before they could finish the swing, knocking them to the ground. Another group of four all tried attacking him at once, but Luffy jumped back. Whoops, he called in the air, landing safely a few feet away from them. Everyone on the deck stared at him in shock, swords aimed in his direction. Standing up straight again, Luffy laughed, holding his bicep. It had been a while since he'd had a fight, the journey to Dawn Island having been uneventful and leaving him itching for a fight. This was the East Blue and everyone here was weak, but that didn't mean it wasn't fun regardless. His haki picked up a presence coming at him from the air behind, but he just sidestepped it, both the man and sword landing where he'd been standing seconds ago. It's not fair to attack from behind, Luffy admonished, grabbing the pirate's head and throwing him at the group of watching pirates. He didn't have a second to think as his haki warned him of the many other pirates crowded behind him, all with sharp pointy swords. It's not fair to attack all at once, Luffy called as he ran forward, the pirates following with a roar, swords raised. Passing the mast, Luffy grabbed onto it, continuing to run forward and letting his arms stretch as he did. He could feel the shock and confusion from the group behind him and grinned to himself. Reaching the end of the ship he turned to look at the pirates over his shoulder. Gotcha, Luffy told them, watching as they all began running away. Gum Gum Rocket, Luffy called out, letting his body fly back towards him arm, and consequently towards the fleeing pirates. He barreled into them, sending them all flying in every direction. Pirates successfully knocked out, Luffy stood with his hands on his hips, smiling still. Man, Sabo was right, surprise does work. Luffy laughed out. Luffy-san, what are you? Kobe asked timidly as he walked towards him shakily. Me, I'm a rubber man, Luffy told Kobe, stretching out his cheek in demonstration. Sabo had told Luffy that not many people in the East Blue had devil fruits and that he would probably have to explain his abilities to people he met, so he wasn't surprised by Kobe's shock. Well, to be fair, Kobe had been shocked for most of their encounter together. Rubber person, you can't be serious, Kobe said, before feeling the presence behind him and scrambling behind Luffy. You've eaten a devil's fruit, haven't you? Alvida asked, standing where Kobe had been. Yeah, the gum fruit. Luffy told her, finally letting go of his cheek and letting it snap back to normal. I see, I'd heard the rumors, but I guess they really do exist. Alvida exclaimed, head tilting. You also seem pretty skilled. You a bounty hunter? She asked. I'm a pirate. A pirate? Huh, all by yourself. Alvida laughed. It's just me right now, but I'll find some more sooner or later. Yeah, 10 crewmen sounds good to me. Luffy said optimistically. Ah, so you're a pirate too, huh? Then that means you and me are enemies, huh? Alvida asked, Luffy smiling still as he listened. Luffy-san, let's get out of here. Kobe said worriedly beside him. Why? Luffy asked with a frown. You saw how powerful her club is. In these waters she's the most. Kobe stopped speaking suddenly, staring at Luffy who stared back, still frowning. I'm the most what? Alvida asked with a grin, the silence reigning for another moment. Luffy could feel Kobe's fear, his anxiety, his nervousness, slowly become overpowered by courage and determination. The fear and anxiety was still there, no doubt about it, but it was overshadowed by the now stronger feelings. I'm the most what? Alvida asked again when no one spoke. The most ugly, cragged old hag ever. Kobe shouted. It was silent again, and Luffy could feel the shock coming from the ship beside this one, more pirates having been watching from there, and the anger from Alvida who stood menacingly in front of them. Kobe squeezed his eyes shut, tears forming, but Luffy could still feel that courage and adrenaline pumping through the boy, making his frown turn into a grin. He began laughing, amused by both Kobe's words and feelings. What did you say? Alvida shouted in rage, Luffy still laughing. I'm going to join the Navy. And then I'm gonna beat up pirates. Kobe exclaimed proudly, despite his fear. Do you even know what you're saying? Alvida asked, still looming over Kobe and Luffy. I do. I'm gonna do what I want to do. I'm gonna join the Navy, and catch your lousy ass. Kobe screamed, hands in fists as he did, leaning forward slightly in exertion. You damn pipsqueak. Alvida growled out, raising her club again, stopping Luffy's laughing and making Kobe scream in terror. Well said. Luffy shouted out, crouching slightly in front of Kobe, preparing himself to take the hit from the club. He did just that, Alvida's club swinging down, landing square on his head and making the wood splinter beneath Luffy's feet from the weight and power behind the attack. His smile grew into a menacing grin now, still taking the weight of the mace. That doesn't work, he exclaimed, feeling the shock from Alvida. 'Cause I'm rubber, he shouted, shifting his weight and swinging his fist back. Gum. His fist flew back, stretching far off the ship and over the water until it couldn't stretch any further. Pistol, he exclaimed, shifting his foot forward in preparation for the force of his swing. His fist came flying back towards him, Alvida watching in a mixture of shock and fear as it sprung towards her, landing on her gut and sending her flying off the ship and into the air, farther than Luffy or Kobe could see. Luffy's fist returned to him, Luffy's whole body moving back as the force pushed him, smile still on his face and Kobe staring at where Alvida had disappeared in shock, jaw on the ground again. Hey, Luffy called, turning to the watching pirates on the neighboring ship. Yes, they asked in unison, stiffening at Luffy's attention. Give Kobe a small boat. He's gonna join the Navy. Keep your mouths shut and let him go. Luffy ordered them with a serious look. Alright, they called back before scrambling to do as told. Luffy grinned at this, feeling Kobe's worry, nervousness, fear, shock, all melt away into a peaceful calm. Happiness. Luffy-san, he said with a small smile. Luffy couldn't respond as cannons suddenly went off, cannonballs splashing in the ocean beside their ship and rocking it. Kobe was knocked off balance, but Luffy managed to save himself, used to the shifting weight of a ship after being on the Moby for so long. When the movement died down they looked to see what was happening, and Luffy saw 3 Navy ships in the distance. It's the Navy, Kobe said in surprise. Oh, you want to be a Marine, right? You should go see 'em. But I'm a pirate, I'm outta here, Luffy said, jumping over the railing and onto the neighboring ship, getting one of the lifeboats ready to go. Get serious, I can't just join the Navy like this. I'll be captured instead, Kobe called after Luffy, still standing on the ship as he did. With those words, Luffy flung his arm at Kobe, grabbing him and pulling him onto the boat and untying it, letting it fall into the water. Kobe screamed the entire way down while Luffy laughed, holding onto the railing to keep from falling off. Landing in the water, Luffy noticed another presence in the water beside them and looked to see an orange-haired woman, her emotions full of shock and slight fear as she looked back at him. He also felt a wave of nostalgia at the scent of tangerines that came off the woman. There was also a smell of berry there, but the sweet tangerine smell reminded him of his days in the facility where Emily used to give him and his brothers tangerines with their soup. They stared at each other for a brief moment before the cannons went off again and reminded them all of their predicament. Kobe was quick to get the ship moving, the two of them heading away from the Marines, leaving the orange-haired woman behind. Luffy couldn't help but wonder about the hatred he'd felt deep inside the woman's emotions though. /////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////// but water surrounding them. Looks like we got away. Kobe mumbled as he looked around at the water, hand shielding his eyes from the sun. Phew, that was fun. Luffy laughed from where he sat. Luffy-san, Kobe asked, stopping Luffy's laughing. If you're heading for the One Piece, that means you're going to the Grand Line, right? Kobe asked him, worry bubbling inside him that made Luffy want to frown. Why was Kobe such a worrywart? It reminded him of Marco a bit, but even Marco wasn't this bad. Yeah, Luffy responded, still smiling despite previous thoughts. That place is also referred to as a pirate graveyard, you know, Kobe told him matter-of-factly. Yeah, that's why I need a strong crew. Luffy said, equally nonchalant as he did. He'd heard all about that from Thatch and the others during parties more than once.
Yo, quick pause, smash that like button, hit subscribe if you're new here, share this video, and tell me in the comments which part you're loving the most.
It was a point of amusement for the veteran crew of pirates, and they would tell the brothers all about how the Grand Line was paradise in comparison to the New World. Hence, why the Grand Line was also nicknamed Paradise despite it also being the pirate graveyard. What about that pirate hunter guy? What's he like? Luffy asked, remembering Alvida talk about him earlier. If others knew this guy's name, he must be strong. He had to start somewhere after all. You mean Zoro? I heard he's being held at a Navy base. Kobe told him with a frown. He's a weakling. Luffy whined, having really hoped this person would be stronger, but if he was being held here in the East Blue, the weakest sea, he was no doubt a weakling. Nothing of the sort. He's as terrifying as a demon. Kobe exclaimed, hands braced on the barrel as he leaned towards Luffy. There was a moment of silence as Kobe's expression changed from one of shocked worry to a frown. Why are you asking about him? He asked, worried for the answer. Luffy grinned his grin at that, laughing a little. Thought I might have him join my crew if he's a good guy. Luffy told him, making Kobe blanch. You're being reckless again, Kobe shouted, reminding Luffy of Ace and Sabo. Come on, he might be a good guy. Luffy told him, knowing that stranger things had happened. He wouldn't be surprised if this demon really was a good guy after all. Besides, he and his brothers were accused of being monsters, demons, hellborn, and they weren't bad people at all. At least, he didn't think so. He couldn't check his own aura, so he couldn't know for sure. He's been caught because he's a bad guy. Kobe retorted, only making Luffy frown, knowing that it wasn't always as black and white as that. No way, no way, no way. Absolutely no. Why did you hit me? Kobe asked, nursing his head after Luffy had hit him again. Just because. Luffy replied as if it were no big deal, but really he was just getting annoyed by Kobe's shouting again. If he had known Kobe would nag him worse than Marco and Sabo combined, he might have reconsidered having him come along. Chapter 2, Pirate Hunter Zoro. What great weather! Luffy exclaimed cheerfully from where he sat on the bow of their small boat. Seagulls flew overhead, the sun was shining, and there were only a few clouds in the sky. Compared to the turbulent weather of both Paradise and the New World, this was amazing. If we keep going this way, we should see the Navy base island soon. Kobe told Luffy, sitting against the railing behind the team. Even though Luffy was already wanted and the Marines were his enemy for more reasons than just him being a pirate, he didn't feel any worry about going to an island with a base on it. If anything, he was excited at the prospect that they would reach a new island soon. Wow, Kobe, you're amazing. We're actually going to reach our destination. Luffy asked, honestly having thought they would drift and maybe reach the island they were intending to land on. He wasn't a navigator like the ones on the Moby, and he hadn't expected Kobe to be either. Of course, these are the bare minimum skills all sailors need, Kobe said as if it were obvious. Maybe it was, but Luffy didn't know that, so instead he laughed, arms stretched out wide beside him. This is no time to be laughing, Luffy-san, Kobe said quietly, more to himself as he noticed Luffy was too busy laughing to notice his words. Kobe was about to tell Luffy more about Zoro seeing as the pirate hunter was being held on the island they were headed to, but as he turned his head to address his companion, he saw something dark on the teen wrist. He hadn't noticed before in the chaos that had been Alvida's ship, but now that things had calmed down, Kobe could clearly see a tattoo on Luffy's wrist. What's that? Kobe asked because even though he could see it was something done in black ink, he couldn't make out what it was. Luffy's laughing stopped as he looked over his shoulder at Kobe in confusion. What's what? Luffy asked, looking around their ship for whatever Kobe was seeing, but finding nothing. Did Kobe have super sight like Ace did? Was that what the boy's glasses were for? He didn't get to ask the question though as Kobe answered him, pointing to his hand. The tattoo on your wrist. I didn't notice it before, what is it? Kobe asked, and even though it was an innocent question, Luffy frowned, looking to his wrist and staring at the numbers. A tattoo, Luffy responded plainly, and Kobe noticed that Luffy didn't seem to be happy about this turn in conversation. Was it a botched tattoo? Was that why Luffy was acting so weird about it all of a sudden? What's it of? Kobe asked, his curiosity getting the better of him. Luffy looked from his wrist now to Kobe, examining the blue of the boy's aura, the innocence and pure curiosity in him. There was no darkness, no malice, no ill will, just simple, plain, curiosity. After another second of wondering how he was going to respond, Luffy turned his wrist, giving Kobe a better look at it. Numbers, Luffy told him, voice still flat as he did. The pink-haired boy stepped forward in confusion, wanting to get a better look. Numbers, Kobe asked in confusion, taking in the bold 11,097 on the inside of Luffy's wrist, and there was something familiar about them, something telling Kobe that he should be wary of someone with these numbers, and then he realized. Wait. 11,097. A as in, the Whitebeard Pirate, Demon Trio, 11,097. The 11,097. Kobe shrieked, backpedaling away from Luffy at the realization that this was 11,097, the monster that he'd seen plastered in the newspaper time and time again alongside his brothers. He should have known, because even though he was better known as 11,097, his name Monkey D. Luffy was also on his wanted poster. Almost everyone in the world knew about the famous numbered trio. The brothers that had escaped from a mental hospital, taking with them everyone else that had been in the hospital with them. It was said that children with numbers on their wrists were dangerous, and if found you were to stay away and contact the Marines at once. There had been sweeps on islands after that, Marines coming and checking anyone they deemed young enough for numbers on their wrists. Kobe himself had been checked years ago, but with no number, the Marines had left him alone. Knowing now that Luffy was one of those children, one of the ones to fight his way out of the hospital despite the guards, Kobe didn't know how he felt. On one hand, he had begun to think of Luffy as a friend, especially when the boy hadn't laughed at his dream to become a Marine, but now he was wondering if that had been because Luffy really was crazy or something. After all, he had been in a mental hospital for a reason, right? Yeah, that's me, Luffy said bluntly, waiting to see what Kobe would say about it. He could feel the turmoil in him, and Luffy was beginning to think that he was going to have to call it a loss with Kobe. He didn't hate the boy for the way he was feeling, he'd seen Ace and Sabo angry at the news about them many times before, and he knew that Kobe had no idea about the facility, but that didn't mean it wasn't disheartening to see someone he'd thought of as a friend suddenly become afraid of him all because of some meaningless numbers on his wrist. Damn those Marines, and double damn those doctors at the facility. Why you've got a bounty of 350 million berry. Kobe continued as if Luffy didn't know his own bounty. It had slowly been rising again along with Ace and Sabo's. The eldest was now at 500 million berry and Sabo was at 450 million himself. Right, Luffy answered instead, still waiting for Kobe's decision on whether him being 11,097 was going to change things or not. The pink-haired boy gaped at him for a minute, mouth opening, closing, opening, as if trying to find words, and then he collapsed to the ground. That's it then. You didn't laugh at my dream to become a Marine because you have a mental problem. Kobe asked quietly as if it was meant for just himself to hear, yet Luffy heard it too. The straw-hatted teen was confused by the words, not expecting them at all as he felt Kobe's sudden dismay. Mental issue? Luffy asked, getting off the bow now and walking over to Kobe, crouching down in front of him. Why yeah, it was all over the news. You and your brothers escaped a mental hospital, right? Kobe asked, wondering if Luffy even knew he had a problem. Oh, that's what they said. Luffy asked, having forgotten about that. It seemed like so long ago that he and his brothers were reading the news about their escape, and he'd forgotten about the details of the Marines' cover story for the facility. Yeah, Kobe said, now unsure of himself. Luffy rocked back on his heels, sitting on the ground now as well. No, it wasn't a mental hospital we escaped from, Luffy told him with another frown, looking at his number. It wasn't, but the Marines, they lied, Luffy said darkly, glaring at the numbers now, annoyed with Kobe's blind devotion towards the Marines. He took a deep breath, reminding himself that there was no way Kobe could know about all the going-ons of the corrupt side of the Marines, so there was no need to get mad at him for it. He could already feel the spike of fear coming from him due to his sudden anger. The Marines lied. About it being a mental hospital. Luffy said again in a calmer voice. He looked to Kobe now, glare gone and replaced with a small frown instead. But why? Why would the Marines lie? Kobe asked in confusion, his fear slowly giving out to his curiosity as he sat up straighter, looking to Luffy's number again. Because they wanted to hide something, why else? Luffy asked as if it were obvious. Hide something? Like what? Kobe asked, only getting more questions with every answer. A facility. The words Luffy spoke were said with such venom it surprised Kobe. He hadn't heard Luffy speak like this in the short time he'd known him. Luffy had been carefree, reckless, and relatively smiley this entire time, so for him to suddenly speak with so much anger, so much hurt, it shocked Kobe more than when the teen had exclaimed his dream to become Pirate King. A facility? Kobe asked. Luffy was quiet now, and Kobe was beginning to wonder if he was going to get an answer, but eventually, he did. A facility. It's a bad place, Kobe. It's run by the government, no matter how much the Marines try and convince everyone it's not. My brothers and I were taken there when we were little and held there for 7 years until we were finally able to get out. Luffy said, eyes growing distant at the memories of the place, and as much as Kobe didn't understand why the Marines would run such a horrible place, or even how this place was so horrible in the first place, the look in Luffy's eyes told him that he wasn't trying to lie or deceive him. He'd been called naive before, too trusting, but right here and now, he believed Luffy when he told him this facility was a bad place, one that he didn't think he wanted to see anytime soon. The Marines weren't happy that we escaped, so they lied and told everyone we were bad people so everyone would be scared of us. We got bounties, and the Whitebeards kept us safe from the Marines and the doctors. The Whitebeards saved us, and eventually, we joined them. Became their family. Luffy told Kobe, pulling his red vest open enough to show the tattoo on his chest that proudly bore the Whitebeards insignia. But I still wanted to become the king of the pirates, and Pops said I was allowed to leave whenever I wanted. I stayed with them until a few months before my 17th birthday, and they brought me back to my home island here in the East Blue where I set sail on my birthday. Even though the Marines want me back, I'm going to become the king of the pirates, no matter what. I'm gonna be the freest man there is. Luffy exclaimed confidently as if there was no doubt in his mind that his words were true. Kobe stared at Luffy in awe, his previous fear melting away as he remembered why he liked Luffy so much. The teen's conviction in everything he said and did, his confidence, was inspiring, and mental health problem or no, Kobe believed Luffy's words, even if it was hard for him to grasp that this meant the Marines weren't as good as he'd always believed them to be. The two sat in silence for a minute more, but finally, Kobe nodded, determination on his face. I believe you. I don't really understand it all, and I still want to become a Marine, but I believe you, Luffy-san. Kobe said. Luffy could feel the truth in the boy's words and smiled now, happy he hadn't lost his friend. Shishishi, I like you, Kobe, even if you are a crybaby weakling. Luffy laughed, holding his hat to his head as he stood and returned to sit on the bow. You'll be a good Marine, Luffy said softly as he climbed onto the bow and sat down, watching the ocean again with a fond look. Kobe felt as if there was more meaning to Luffy's words than he was grasping, but seeing as he couldn't figure it out, he brushed them off, instead walking closer to Luffy. Tell me about this Zolo guy, Luffy said after a brief pause. Kobe blinked, not expecting those to be Luffy's next words, not after the big revelation that, not only was Luffy 11,097 but that the Marines apparently ran a facility, whatever that meant. Well, it's Zoro, not Zolo. Kobe started with a slight stutter, watching Luffy's back. Zoro, right, Luffy said with a nod, trying to remember the name. If Sabo heard he was giving people nicknames again, he'd hunt him down just to lecture him about it. He's being held prisoner on the island, and he's a famous pirate hunter here in the East Blue. The man who's chopped up bounties like a bloodthirsty beast. People say he's a demon in human form. Kobe said, sweating nervously at the thought of who they were going to see. Of course, it was a bit silly now to be scared of the East Blue pirate hunter now that he knew he was sailing with a notorious ex-Whitebeard pirate. At Kobe's words, Luffy smiled, laughing to himself. A demon, huh, maybe he's strong after all. // We made it. The Navy base city. Luffy exclaimed as he jumped off the boat, Kobe guiding it safely into port behind him. Even though he was a well-known pirate, Luffy felt no qualms walking through the city. Besides, Alvida hadn't recognized him, and it took Kobe seeing his wrist to realize who he was as well. Maybe no one here would notice either. Kobe and Luffy began walking through the town together, Luffy with a grin of excitement and Kobe with a look of nervousness. Seriously, Luffy-san, you're crazy to want him to join you. Kobe said, trying to reason with the pirate. I haven't decided yet, I just wanna see if he's a good guy, Luffy told Kobe truthfully, knowing that if this Zoro guy wasn't good, then he wouldn't want anything to do with him. He's been caught because he's a bad guy. Kobe yelled, stopping in the middle of the street while Luffy continued forward, stopping at a fruit stand. Picking up a pear, he took a bite, tossing a coin to the woman running the stand. Do you know if Zoro's being held at the base? He asked her but was immediately met with everyone nearby jumping away in shock. It seems like the name Zoro is taboo here. Kobe whispered to Luffy. The pirate examined the staring townspeople, fear radiating off of them. Let's check out the base anyways. Luffy decided, frowning a bit as he continued eyeing the scared townspeople. You're gonna be a Marine, right? Luffy asked as they began walking towards the base again, Kobe following a bit more unsure of himself now. Why yes, but I'm not really ready yet. Rumor has it, a guy named Captain Morgan is at this base, and, like with Zoro's name, the townspeople who had gradually begun getting back to work, all jumped away again in shock. Their fear doubled, which made Luffy's frown deepen, because even if he didn't like Marines, he knew that civilians usually liked them. So why were these ones so scared of this captain guy more so than Zoro? Strange. I understand Zoro, but why are they afraid of a Navy captain's name? Kobe asked as they began walking down the street once more, hurrying to walk beside Luffy. The older teen looked at Kobe out of the corner of his eye, still frowning, and shrugged. Maybe he's a bad guy, Luffy said simply, as if it were obvious, and to him, it was. A bad guy. But he's a Marine, Kobe said incredulously, suddenly remembering that Luffy himself was a pirate and technically a bad guy. Doesn't matter if you're Marine, pirate, civilian or merchant. People are good or bad depending on their actions. Marines can be bad and pirates can be good, Luffy said as if he'd rehearsed the words to himself before. Kobe stared at Luffy for a minute, not responding. The two continued walking without talking, and eventually, they reached a large iron gate, the words Marine written across it in big kanji. Alright, that's the place, Luffy said, hands on his hips as he looked at the gate. I'm finally here, Kobe said with tears in his eyes. I guess this is where we part ways, Luffy-san. It was only for a short time, but Kobe, who had been crying into his arm, noticed that Luffy was no longer at his side at the gate, but rather instead, he was scaling the large wall, feet kicking as he tried getting good footing. Luffy-san, what in the world are you doing? Kobe shrieked, arms waving as he panicked. Now where's this demon? Luffy asked, hand shielding his eyes as he scanned the courtyard in front of him. He wouldn't be out here. I'm sure he's in a prison cell or something. Kobe's sweat dropped, standing at the base of the wall as he waited for Luffy to finish investigating. There he is. Alright, Luffy called, dropping down from the wall and running off towards where he'd seen the man. He had felt the emotions first, the hunger, some pain, frustration, annoyance, but most of all, determination, conviction. With such strong emotions, it was easy for Luffy to pinpoint where the man was at, and once he wanted to get a closer look. See, there he is, Luffy said, now atop another wall and watching the green-haired man, tied to a post. Kobe climbed up beside him, his skepticism clear to Luffy as he did. Yeah, right, he wouldn't be out. Kobe stopped talking, eyes widening as he saw that Luffy had been right. Roronoa Zoro was sitting within plain view of them. He was on the other side of the courtyard, but it was no doubt the pirate hunter he'd heard about, the black bandana, and Hamaraki confirmed it. Luffy stared at the man with a frown, pulling up the man's aura and seeing that it was a bright, clear blue just like Kobe's. There wasn't even a speck of gray in it, which made Luffy smile in relief. He can get away easy if we untie those ropes, Luffy told Kobe, pointing to the man in question. Don't be stupid. There's no telling what'll happen if we let him loose. I bet he'd try to kill you too, Luffy-san, you're a pirate after all. Kobe shouted at the pirate, fear gone for a brief second as he did. Don't worry, I'm strong. Luffy replied without any worry. He was confident that he could take the man. He'd fought many more men than just him before, and while Luffy was sure that this man was no stranger to fights, he didn't think he would stand a chance against anyone from the Mobi. Hey, you guys. Zoro suddenly spoke up, causing Kobe to stiffen in shock at the fact that they'd drawn his attention. Luffy looked towards the man as well, curious as to what he was going to say. He was still unsure whether or not he wanted Zoro to join him, so based on what the man said and did, he would decide. You're an eyesore. Get lost, he said, looking over to them at the end. Kobe began to freak out, clearly scared by the words, while Luffy continued examining him. He could feel a peak in the man's annoyance, but there was something else there, like he had another reason for saying his words other than being annoyed with them. Luffy-san, there's no way you could survive with him on your crew. You're a pirate, he's a pirate hunter. If you took him, Kobe stopped trying to convince Luffy when they noticed that there was a ladder being placed beside them, a little girl climbing up it and shushing them. She peeked around the courtyard, and once she found the coast was clear, she hung a rope down, using it to climb down the other side of the wall. Once safely on the ground, she began running toward Zoro, which only made Kobe start freaking out again. Oh no, Luffy-san, stop her. She'll be killed, Kobe asked his friend, hoping he would see the danger that the child was in. It was useless though, because the girl was already reaching Zoro, hugging something to her chest and smiling while Zoro frowned at her. What? He asked in a growl, making Kobe squeak in fear for not only the girl but them as well. He wouldn't put it past the man to kill them with just a look. You must be hungry. I made you some rice balls, the girl said, unwrapping what she was holding as she spoke. Luffy realized that some of the pain Zoro was feeling must be hunger, which only made his stomach growl in response. He'd gone hungry before, and he knew how much it not only hurt but how much it weakened a person. Do you wanna get killed, Pipsqueak? Scram, Zoro said to the kid, but again, Luffy didn't feel that Zoro was being malicious with his words. There was another reason behind them, an urgency that wasn't being conveyed through his tone, but the way he was feeling. You haven't eaten anything this whole time. Here, this is my first time, but I worked really hard to make them. The girl said, presenting the rice balls to Zoro. Luffy saw the shift in the man's features as if tempted or touched, he wasn't sure, and then he was scowling again. I ain't hungry. You're an eyesore. Get the hell out of here. Zoro growled out. Luffy could feel the lies rolling off the man with each word he spoke, making him frown. He could feel that Zoro had a reason for saying these things, but he couldn't figure out what it was just yet. But, I don't want 'em. Don't make me kick your ass. Again, Luffy could feel that Zoro wouldn't follow through with those words, that he was once again lying, but why? The feeling of new emotions nearing drew Luffy's attention to the gates off to the side of the courtyard, 3 men walking through them. It's not nice to be a bully. A new voice said almost mockingly. Luffy, watching as 2 Marines and a man in a suit walked in. His frown deepened as he felt Zoro's emotions dive into worry that was directed toward the kid, and the teen was beginning to piece together all of Zoro's previous words and lies. A quick check told Luffy that while the Marines at the blonde's side both had clear blue auras, the blonde man himself had a much darker blue tinge with hints of gray around its edges. The sight put Luffy on edge, but he forced himself to take deep breaths, turning his attention to what was now being said. You seem surprisingly well, Roronoa Zoro. The blonde in the suit said. Beside him, Luffy could feel Kobe's relief, contradicting Zoro's worry, and it made Luffy want to find happier emotions. Thank goodness. He must be with the Navy. Now that girl will be safe. Kobe said, relieved. Luffy said nothing to that, only looking at Kobe at the corner of his eye before turning back to watch the scene in front of him. Oh, those are some tasty-looking rice balls. The blonde said, snatching up one of the balls before the kid could react. Stop. The blonde's eyes widened as he took a bite and a look of disgust washed over his face before he immediately began spitting the food out, coughing as he did. Too damn sweet. They're full of sugar. You're supposed to use salt, not sugar. He shouted to the girl, fist raised as he did. Luffy couldn't feel that the man had any intent to actually hurt the kid himself though, so he didn't move, but his frown did deepen. But I thought they might taste better sweet. The girl said to him, still holding the remaining rice ball in her hand. The blonde quickly kicked it down though, stomping on it as he shouted some more. Take this. And this. Stop. Stop. The girl fell to her knees as she watched the rice balls get smashed into the dirt. Zoro didn't even look up as this happened, though he was frowning and Luffy could feel an anger rising in him. How horrible. Kobe whispered from where he watched, wondering how a Marine could do such a thing. Finally, the blonde stopped stomping, leaving the dirt-covered rice on the ground while the girl looked on in tears. And I worked so hard to make those. She sniffled. Did you not read the notice? Those who help criminals will be executed. Navy Captain Morgan. The blonde recited, pulling out said notice and reading off of it. The girl stiffened, and Luffy could feel the fear striking through her. Zoro's anger raised as well, and Luffy would have intervened by now if he didn't feel that, while the blonde spoke as if he would, he didn't have any conviction in him. Looks like even little brats know how scary my dad is. The blonde said with a smirk, hand on his hip as he looked down on the girl. Dad? Luffy questioned, wondering what this guy's dad had to do with anything. Then that's Captain Morgan's son. Kobe asked in shock, realizing faster than Luffy who the blonde kid was. You. Throw the kid out. The blonde said, pointing to one of the soldiers behind him. Sir, I said throw her over the wall. Or can you not follow my orders? Don't make me tell my dad. The blonde said, grabbing the soldier by his shirt as he berated him. Why yes, sir. Right away sir. The soldier replied, Luffy feeling his fear and unwanting. And no. The girl cried as the Marine crouched to pick the girl up before tossing her over the wall. Luffy's frown never let up as he watched the girl fly over the wall and he jumped off the top of the wall, stretching his arms to ensure he would reach the girl and tucking her to his chest, landing on his back to take the brunt of the force. Thanks. The girl said with a smile to Luffy, her gratitude much nicer to Luffy than the fear he'd felt from her moments ago. Are you alright Luffy-san? Kobe asked as he ran over in worry, his attention quickly shifting to the girl in Luffy's arms. Are you alright? I can't believe how horrible that guy is. Do you hurt anywhere? The pink-haired boy asked as he kneeled by the girl, checking her over for injury. Meanwhile, Luffy was standing, collecting his hat off the ground and putting it back on his head and making sure the string was around his neck. With Kobe occupied, Luffy had no one to stop him as he climbed back up and this time over the wall. He noticed that the blonde and the 2 soldiers were gone, leaving both Zoro and Luffy alone in the courtyard. I hear you're a bad guy, Luffy said simply to the man, wanting to see and feel his reaction. Zoro looked at him, scowling again. Are you still here? Zoro asked in another growl. Are you even strong at all? Luffy continued asking. Mind your own business. Walking over to the man, Luffy inspected him, his frown never letting up. He could still feel the ever-present annoyance coming from the man, along with the small bit of worry directed towards the girl, and then there was the mixture of duller emotions, like pain and exhaustion and even a little bit of remaining anger. If it were me, I'd probably starve in 3 days, Luffy said matter-of-factly, knowing it was true. I've got more spirit than you. I will live through this. I swear it, Zoro said with a grin now, and the strong feelings of determination and conviction were back tenfold, finally making Luffy's frown subside and be replaced with a grin of his own. Pleased with what he'd heard, Luffy turned to leave but was stopped when Zoro spoke up again. Wait, he called, making Luffy turn to look back at him. Could you pick that up for me? Zoro asked, looking to the crushed rice ball. You're gonna eat this? Luffy asked, not in disgust, but genuine curiosity. He knew that after the 7 years of garbage soup that this rice ball would have been heaven sent to him and his brothers, so it was no surprise to him that the starved pirate hunter would think the same. It's mostly a mud ball now, Luffy warned as he picked it up in his hands. Just shut up and give it here. Zoro shouted in slight desperation. Luffy only watched him for another second more before grinning and tossing the food, dirt and all, into the man's mouth. He ate it greedily, not losing a single bit, and then coughed. Told you so, Luffy said as he watched, arms folded over his chest, still smiling. It was good. Tell the kid I said thanks for the food. Zoro said to Luffy, meaning his words. Luffy's smile widened. // backslash slash backslash slash backslash slash backslash slash backslash slash backslash slash backslash. Really? Yeah, he ate every last bite. Luffy told the girl Rika he'd found out. Kobe sat on the steps in the alley they were in, a mixture of confusion and disbelief fighting inside him as he listened to Luffy talk. I'm so happy, Rika said, holding her hands to her chest as she did. Luffy could feel just how happy she was, and it made him happy by extension, glad that there was finally some good emotions after all the bad ones. Is Zoro really as evil as all the rumors say? Kobe asked softly in confusion, not understanding how someone who was portrayed as such a bad guy could actually be good. No, Rika said in the man's defense. After all, he let himself get crucified in our place. She said, guilt now rolling off of her in waves that made Luffy take deep breaths to avoid feeling guilty himself. And those bad feelings were back. Huh, what do you mean? Luffy asked once he was able to successfully block out the feelings, wanting to know more. Even though he was pretty sure he'd made a decision on wanting Zoro to join his crew or not, that didn't mean he couldn't try and learn more about him. It would also help to know how he'd gotten crucified in the first place. It's all that Helmeppo's fault. He's Captain Morgan's son. Rika began before launching into the story of how Zoro had defended both the girl and her mother from the man's dog and in turn gotten imprisoned. Helmeppo punches and kicks him while he's tied up. Rika said before crying into her hands, obviously distressed. I see, Kobe said, but a sudden wave of fear and a loud noise drew their attention to the building they were sitting beside. Walking in, they saw Helmeppo there, demanding free food as he lounged in his chair, soldiers at his side. A familiar scent of tangerines and berry drew Luffy's attention to the red-haired girl sitting in one of the chairs, but with more pressing matters, Luffy didn't pay her much mind, instead focusing back to the blonde. I've been bored lately, so I've decided to execute Zoro tomorrow. Look forward to it, Helmeppo announced to everyone in the room before laughing. Luffy felt a familiar burning rage fill him as he clenched his fist, running forward and punching the man squarely in the jaw, sending him flying out of his chair and into the wall. What the hell are you doing? Helmeppo cried out, holding his face as the soldiers he was with ran to his side. Luffy was ready to charge forward again, but Kobe stopped him by grabbing his arms. Luffy-san, please stop, Kobe pleaded, and even though Luffy knew he could easily get out of the boy's grip, he let himself be held back. This guy is the worst kind of person. Luffy growled out, trying to let the rage in him dispel. He knew it'd do no good to beat the blonde up, all that would accomplish was making him feel only a smidgen better and getting the whole of this island's marines after him, so he let himself be held back, forced himself to let go of the anger. After all, he still had to get Zoro to join his crew. Why you hit me? I'm Captain Morgan's son, you know. Helmeppo cried in shock. So what? Luffy called back, and all that work he'd put into not getting angry fell apart as he felt it all come rushing back. I'm gonna tell my dad and he's gonna execute you. The blonde responded. Fight me yourself, Luffy shouted, raising a fist, ready to fight. Luffy-san, calm down, Kobe once again pleaded, and the worry and fear from the boy gave him something else to focus on besides his rage. I've made up my mind, Kobe, Luffy said, addressing the pink-haired boy now to focus on something else besides the infuriating blonde in front of him. I'm going to have Zoro join my crew. /////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////// He could feel the pirate hunter's muted emotions change from nostalgic to longing, and then sadness and another bout of conviction. There was a moment as the man woke up that there was a tiny bit of fear, but it was gone quickly, replaced with a feeling of disorientation as his head shot up to look at Luffy. Zoro was quick to hide his emotions from his face, a sneer replacing the fear in an instant. "You again. You sure have lots of free time," he said in what was supposed to be a menacing voice, but Luffy could still feel the emotions from the man's dream, making the words less intimidating. Not that the man could intimidate Luffy in his state anyway. "I'll untie you, so join my crew," Luffy said finally. Zoro's confusion was clear on both his face and his emotions. Say what? He asked, making Luffy grin. I'm looking for people to join my pirate crew, Luffy told him, walking closer to him. Forget it. Me, stooping to a criminal's level. Screw that, Zoro said, grinning at first before sneering once more. What's wrong with being a pirate? Luffy asked in curiosity. Pirates are despicable. As if I'd wanna be one. Zoro replied. Luffy smiled again. Oh, come on, you're already known an evil bounty hunter. Luffy said as if being a pirate was better, or equal to that. People can say whatever they want, but I ain't done anything I regret. I will live through this and accomplish what I want. Zoro said with another grin, another bout of determination filling him. Yeah, but I've decided you're gonna join me. Luffy said, not telling the man that he was set to be executed soon. He didn't want that to influence Zoro's decision on whether he wanted to join or not with his imminent death. Quit deciding on your own. Zoro shouted to him, only making him laugh. I hear you use a sword, Luffy said, ignoring the previous words. Yeah, but that stupid son took them, Zoro said, calming down from his previous anger. I'll go get it back for you. Luffy proposed. What? So if you want your sword, join my crew. Luffy said with a smile, because even though he didn't want Zoro to feel forced to join due to his impending execution, he had no qualms holding the man's belongings for ransom. You're really getting on my nerves. Zoro shouted again, Luffy feeling that it was true. Not responding, Luffy began running off, hearing the man muttering to himself but not hearing what was said. You idiot. The base is in the other direction. Zoro called over to him, making Luffy skid to a stop and turn around, stretching his arms back and grinning. Gum gum rocket, Luffy shouted, arms flying past Zoro, and then his body. He briefly felt Zoro's shock behind him as he rocketed away, making him laugh. He didn't really know where to go now though, but he did know important people usually were at the top of the tall buildings, so he decided the next course of action would be to go up. After all, that Hemippo guy was important, right? So he would be high up. Pleased with this logic, Luffy began stretching his arms up, slowly making his way up until he was grabbing onto the tallest part of the building, his body flying upwards. This high up he could see on top of the building where a large group of Marines were standing and a giant statue was being lifted up. He took a quick look at the auras, knowing now was a good time to check them out while he could see them all at once, and noticed that there was someone there with a dark gray, almost black aura, making him frown. He hadn't been expecting to find someone with such a dark color so soon in his journey, but there was no helping it. The person also held some darkness in them too, which made him uneasy, but he tried not to let it bother him. He knew that people in the East Blue weren't the strongest, and he was confident that he could take this person, whoever they were. Distracted by his thoughts, Luffy hadn't noticed that he was falling, but instead of landing on the roof with everyone else, he was destined to land back on the ground below him. In an attempt to change direction, Luffy grabbed onto a rope connected to the statue, but as he did it slackened, the statue falling as Luffy pulled himself towards the roof. Landing safely, he watched with everyone else as the top half of the statue fell off the roof into the ground below. He felt the shock surrounding him and an underlying fear, but he was too mesmerized by the loud thump as the statue hit the ground. Sorry, he said, more to the Marines with the blue aura than the one with the dark gray. Seize him, I'm going to kill him. The man with the dark gray aura screamed, Luffy feeling his anger so strong it very nearly overwhelmed him. He actually stumbled back in shock from it, blinking. Whoa, that was close. He muttered to himself as he took a few deep breaths. Yes, sir. Right away, sir. Within seconds the whole horde of Marines were running at him, but a familiar scent had Luffy running over to Helmeppo who happened to be on the roof. Daddy, that's him. He's the one who hit me. Helmeppo yelled, pointing to Luffy who was right beside him now. Oh, it's you, Luffy said, pleased that he'd found the man so fast. He knew he'd been right about important people being high up. Helmeppo shrieked in fear at the sight of Luffy so close, trying to run away, but Luffy grabbed him by the back of his shirt. I've been looking for you. Come with me. There's something I want you to give back. Luffy told him as he began running away with him in tow. Let me go, Helmeppo-sama. The shouting grew distant behind him as he ran, dragging the blonde with him. Tell me where Zoro's sword is, Luffy said to Helmeppo as he ran down a carpeted hall. He smelled the hall, a scent of tangerines and berry drifting to his nose that told him that red-haired girl was nearby, but yet again, bigger things held his attention. I'll tell you. Just stop dragging me, Helmeppo cried, tears running down his face. Luffy immediately came to a stop, dangling the man who went limp. All right, talk, Luffy demanded, waiting for the information he needed. In my room. We just passed it, the blonde told him weakly, pointing behind Luffy. A bit irritated by that, Luffy sighed. What? Why didn't you say so? Now we gotta go back, Luffy said as he turned around, only to find Marines pointing guns at him. Freeze. Let Helmeppo-sama go. No, Luffy said simply, holding the man up in front of him and staring blankly at them. The Marines held no conviction in them, so when they saw the blonde being held up, they immediately began sweating. Go ahead and shoot, if you dare. Luffy taunted. He was annoyed with this whole island, and these Marines were just making things worse. If he could have even a little bit of fun messing with them, he would. After all, he wouldn't let these Marines actually hurt the blonde, he would interfere before then. It wasn't necessary though because, as expected, Helmeppo began squirming, arms flailing in desperation. "No, don't," he shouted, to which Luffy immediately began charging through the Marines, all of them moving out of his way to keep from hurting the blonde. Helmeppo practically reeked of fear, and if Luffy wasn't so good at blocking the emotion, he'd be feeling the same way himself. Running through the hall, Luffy used his sense of smell to find the room, seeing as the blonde's emotions had gone muted, telling him the man had passed out. Opening the door, he dropped the blonde unceremoniously to the ground, sniffing for anything that smelled like Zoro. The room reeked of perfume, which disoriented him a bit, making it harder than it should have been to find the sword, but he did it in the end. He was momentarily confused as to why there were 3 swords, but they all smelled like Zoro's, so he grabbed them before running to the window. Outside, he could see Kobe standing in front of Zoro, staring at the other side of the courtyard where Marines were lined up, pointing guns at him, the man with the dark aura at the forefront. Scowling, Luffy flung the window open, stretching himself back in preparation to land in the courtyard. Flying through the air, he heard the yell of the man with the dark aura telling the Marines to fire, and then the bang of the guns. He was just in time though, as he landed in front of Kobe and beside Zoro, shielding them with his rubber body. "What are you, Luffy-san? Straw Hat?" All at once everyone was shouting, their fear rising within them, but it wasn't necessary as Luffy felt his skin stretch in each spot that held a bullet. He curled in on himself, allowing the pull to become a push and grinning. "That doesn't work," Luffy called out as he let the bullet fly back the way they'd come. He could feel everyone's shock and Kobe's relief as the boy began trying to untie Zoro. He laughed loudly, unfazed. "I told you I was strong," he said, more to Kobe and Zoro than to the Marines. Who the hell are you?" Zoro asked in disbelief behind him. 11,097, Monkey D. "Luffy." The man with the dark aura spoke up before Luffy could answer. Luffy's laughing immediately stopped as he felt another, even stronger, wave of shock coming from everyone but Kobe. 11,097. "I thought he was a Whitebeard pirate though. What's a Whitebeard doing in the East Blue? I thought you looked familiar. What's a notorious criminal like you doing here in the East Blue?" the large man asked. Luffy debated on whether he wanted to answer the man or not, still put off by the man's darkness, but decided he may as well. Besides, if he was going to be his own man, form his own crew, he needed people to know that so they wouldn't think he was still a part of Pop's crew. "I'm starting my own crew," Luffy said, not giving the man any more information than that. "Oh, Whitebeard let you leave just like that?" the man asked, making Luffy's frown deepen. "Yeah, he did," he answered. "Listen up. I, Captain Axe-Hand Morgan, am going to take down this demon child here and now." The man yelled, yet he didn't move to attack him yet, so Luffy decided he wouldn't prepare for a fight just yet. "No, listen to me. I'm gonna form my own crew, better than Pop's, and then I'm gonna become the king of the pirates, you hear?" Luffy said, yelling to everyone in the courtyard, wanting everyone to hear his dream. "King of the pirates, do you know what that means?" Zoro asked in shock behind him. "King of the pirate is king of the pirates. Are there any other meanings?" Luffy asked with a smile, completely disregarding the Marines now in favor of looking at Zoro. Everyone blinked at him, not believing what he was saying, but he didn't understand why. He thought he'd been pretty clear. I was shocked, too. But Luffy-san is serious. That's how he is. He intends to become the king of the pirates and obtain this world's ultimate treasure, the One Piece. Kobe said with a smile, fists held up in front of himself as he spoke. Luffy gave both Kobe and Zoro his famous D grin before grabbing the swords off his back and holding them out to Zoro, despite the fact that the man was tied up still. "Here's your treasure. Which is yours? They all smelled like you, so I brought all 3 of them." Luffy said, still ignoring the shocked Marines. "Smelled? All 3 are mine. I use 3-sword style." Zoro told him, and even though he was confused by what Luffy meant by smell, he ignored it. "For now at least. You'll take him, right? If we fight together now, you'll be a government-defying villain. Would you prefer that, or being killed by the Navy like this?" Luffy asked, because now that the cat was out of the bag with that one, there was no point not mentioning it now. "What are you, the devil's son?" Zoro asked with a grin, making Luffy laugh. "I've been told that," Luffy said honestly, having heard Marines, pirates, and even civilians call him much worse than that. "Well, whatever. I'll be a pirate if I'm gonna die here instead," Zoro said, still grinning. "Hooray, so you'll join my crew?" Luffy asked, arms outstretched in joy at the prospect. "Alright, woohoo, this is great, alright," Luffy continued cheering. "Okay, now, untie these stupid ropes already," Zoro yelled in desperation, all of them remembering now that they had an audience of Marines watching them. Luffy immediately got to work on trying to untie the ropes, noticing distantly that the Marines were talking amongst themselves, but he ignored that. "Damn, these knots are tight," Luffy said as he tugged at them, but he swore they were getting tighter, not looser. Hey, quit wastin' time, Zoro shouted in urgency, noticing that the Marines looked to be preparing themselves again. As expected, the Marines all switched out their guns for swords, running at them as Luffy continued tugging. Huh, that's weird. It got tighter instead, Luffy said, rubbing the back of his head as he examined the ropes. Disclaimer: this story do not belong to me. The author is, this captain wears red by OPWonders. Give me a damn sword. Zoro yelled at him. Luffy-san, Kobe cried. Looking over now, Luffy saw the incoming swords and quickly gave Zoro a sword of his own. In an instant, Zoro cut the ropes off and grabbed the rest of the swords, using them to block all of the Marines at once. So cool, Luffy said in awe, never having seen someone use three-sword style before. He'd seen many swordsmen before, but none like Zoro. Move and you're dead, Zoro growled to the Marines, making them stiffen in fear. Too scary. One of them cried. I'll be a pirate, I promise you that. I'm officially a criminal, now that I've fought the Navy. But I'll tell you this right now. I'm only going to fulfill my ambition. Zoro told Luffy, a cloud passing overhead and shading them momentarily. Ambition? Luffy asked with a smile. To be the world's greatest swordsman. If I wind up having to give that up, you'd better accept responsibility and apologize to me on the end of my sword. Zoro told him, Luffy feeling his undying conviction again. The world's greatest swordsman. That sounds great, Luffy said honestly, still smiling. The king of the pirates would need no less than that on his crew. Luffy told him, making the swordsman grin back. You sure talk big. At this point, whether it's as a criminal or whatever else, I will spread my name throughout the world. Zoro shouted through his sword. What are you standing around for? Slaughter them this instant. The Marines shrieked in terror at Morgan's words while Luffy's grin turned more deadly. Duck, Zoro, Luffy told his new crewmate, swinging his foot back. Gum gum whip. There was only a brief second of shock from Zoro before he did as told, Luffy's leg whipping over him and knocking over the Marines he'd been holding back. Why you did it? Incredible. Kobe cheered from behind Luffy. What the hell are you? Zoro asked Luffy, standing back up. I ate the gum gum fruit, Luffy said, kicking his leg back and forth to stretch it out. Gum gum fruit? Zoro asked in confusion, sword still held in his mouth. A rubber person. Captain, we don't stand a chance against them. These guys are crazy. We can't even handle Zoro by himself, much less a Whitebeard pirate and one of the demon trio. This is a direct order. Morgan shouted, drawing Luffy, Zoro and Kobe's attention back to him. Everyone who spouted weakness just now, must shoot themselves in the head. I have no need for weakling soldiers. Morgan ordered, much to Luffy's dislike. These troops are mental, Zoro said as he crouched back down in a fighting position. Luffy-san, Kobe shouted behind Zoro, but before the man could look, his new captain ran past him and towards the Marines faster than he could blink. Crush this navy, Kobe shouted to the straw-hatted pirate. Running through the Marines, Luffy ran right towards Morgan, scowling as he stretched his arm behind him and swung it forward. The captain blocked it with his large axe hand, but he obviously wasn't expecting Luffy to be as strong as he was, because with a burst of armament hockey, Luffy cracked the axe, and then it shattered into pieces right then and there. The Marines stared on in shock while Luffy felt the captain's anger fill again. Angry himself, Luffy felt it double as Morgan's anger influenced his own, and he pushed his fist through the shattered remains of the axe and into Morgan's chest, sending him flying backward. Hold it, Straw Hat, Helmeppo shouted from behind him before he could stalk after the captain who was getting back up. I said hold it. Pay attention, I have a hostage here. Luffy was tempted to ignore the man, his anger pounding in his ears and muffling the man's words. The blind rage he felt nearly made him go forward to continue beating up Morgan, but Zoro's voice stopped him. Hey, the simple word made the anger drain away, like whenever Ace or Sabo would talk softly to him in their understanding tone, waiting for his anger to dispel. Turning, Luffy finally took in the gun that was being held to Kobe's head and stared. If you value this guy's life, don't move. One move and I'll shoot. Helmeppo shouted to him. Luffy continued staring for another minute, feeling Kobe's fear, and smiled. Kobe blinked in surprise before a resolve filled him. Luffy-san, I don't want to get in your way. Even if it means dying. Kobe shouted, genuinely meaning his words. Yeah, I know. Give it up, stupid son. Kobe really is ready to die. Luffy said, holding his bicep as he began walking towards Kobe and Helmeppo, smiling still. Don't move. I told you not to move. I'll shoot. Helmeppo shouted, and even though Luffy could feel Morgan's presence behind him, he ignored it. Gum gum. I am Navy Captain, Axe Hand, Morgan. Dad, kill him, quick. Pistol. All at once, Luffy threw his punch at Helmeppo, knocking the blonde into the wall on the other side of the courtyard, while Zoro slashed through Morgan who had attempted beheading Luffy with one of the soldiers, sword seeing as his axe had been busted by the teen earlier. Nice, Zoro, Luffy said, arm snapping back in place. My pleasure, Captain, Zoro said, the two grinning to each other. Captain Morgan's been defeated. Unbelievable. These guys are insane. If anyone still wants to catch us, come forward, Zoro called to the Marines, but Luffy felt there was no need for that because instead of fear, there was a relief throughout the Marines that told the team the captain was every bit the bad guy he'd thought he was. Hooray! We're free! Yahoo! Morgan's reign of terror is over. Hooray for the Navy! Weapons and hats were thrown in the air, Marines started dancing with each other, and Luffy felt a giant wave of happiness finally overtake the fear and nervousness that had been so prevalent since he'd reached this island. Everyone's happy their captain's been beaten. Zoro asked with a raised eyebrow. Everyone was just afraid of Morgan. Kobe said gleefully as if it all made sense now. Zoro suddenly twitched and then fell onto his back, Kobe freaking out while Luffy watched, feeling that Zoro was still awake, and not in too much pain. What's wrong Zoro-san? Are you hurt? Kobe asked as he rushed over to the man. I'm hungry. Chapter 3, Onward to Orange Town. I'm stuffed. I was definitely at my rope's end, having not eaten for 3 weeks. Zoro said with a smile, leaning back in his chair. Huh, you're finished already? Luffy asked, pulling his fork out of his mouth. How the heck can you have a bigger appetite than me? Zoro asked, pointing to the stacks of dishes beside the straw-hatted teen, eyebrow raised in disbelief. Zoro had literally been starving after all, and Luffy was still eating as if he'd been the one to go weeks without meals. It tastes good. Right, Kobe? Luffy asked the pink-haired boy who sat at the bar where Rika's mother was smiling and cleaning dishes. Rika was nearby as well, carrying dirty dishes from the table Luffy and Zoro sat at and bringing them to her mother. Thank you for treating me to food, too, Kobe said, rubbing the back of his head as he addressed Rika's mom. She smiled at him, continuing to clean. It's no problem. The town has been saved after all, she said cheerfully. You really are amazing, Rika said to Luffy with a wide smile, Luffy smiling back as he allowed the happy feelings to sink into him. Yep, I am. And I'm gonna be even more amazing. 'Cause I'm gonna be king of the pirates. And I even have a crew, Luffy said, looking to Zoro who was still lounging in his chair as he listened, waiting on Luffy to finish eating. Hearing the teen's words, he smiled. So, how many others have you gathered besides me? He asked, watching Luffy take another large bite of meat. Luffy gave him a blank look and Zoro raised another eyebrow. You said you were in the middle of gathering a crew. To be the king of the pirates, you must have a good number gathered, he said matter-of-factly. Removing his fork, Luffy pointed to the green-haired man with it. Just you, he said simply. Huh, then. Zoro pointed between the two of them in shock and Luffy nodded. Yep, just us two, Luffy confirmed. We're gonna call just us two a pirate crew, Zoro asked, expression evening out again. What's wrong with that? We're strong, Luffy replied, as if that made everything better. Besides, you had to start somewhere. What about a ship? Where's your pirate ship? Zoro asked, leaning on the table. There, Luffy pointed out the window to the boat he and Kobe had arrived on and Zoro moved to the window to look himself. We'll have a ship this big before long, Luffy exclaimed optimistically, stretching his arms out in demonstration of how big he wanted his future ship to be. Zoro laughed. And how's that? He asked, Luffy's smile never wavering despite the swordsman's skepticism. And I'd like a pirate flag, too. Yeah, so cool, Luffy said to himself, ignoring Zoro completely. Zoro rubbed his forehead, wondering what he'd gotten himself into. Meanwhile, Kobe spoke up. I think Luffy-san was born without any sense of planning, he said with a nervous chuckle. Did I really make this guy my captain? Zoro asked himself, Luffy continuing to eat with a smile as if he didn't hear, or realize, what was being talked about. Well, we'll get more crew members before long, he said with a laugh. Hey, where are you guys gonna go now? Rika asked, still standing beside Luffy. Isn't it obvious? Paradise, Luffy said, the occupants in the room looking at him in confusion. Paradise? Zoro asked, wondering if that was an island he'd never heard of. Ah, right, the Grand Line, Luffy said, correcting himself. How did you mix up the Grand Line with Paradise? Besides, you still only have 2 crew members. There's no way you could go there. No way, Kobe shouted, spitting his juice out in shock from where he sat behind Luffy at the bar. Everyone turned to watch him, wondering if he was done yelling. Is the Grand Line that terrible of a place? Rika asked. Naturally. Nah, not really. Both Kobe and Luffy answered at the same time. Zoro raised an eyebrow at the two, sitting back down to listen seeing as things were getting interesting. He had almost forgotten that Luffy was 11,097, a former Whitebeard pirate, and had been to the Grand Line before. Sure, his new captain may be a bit spontaneous, and possibly stupid, but he was at least experienced in comparison to him. What do you mean it's not? It's the pirate's graveyard for a reason, Kobe shouted to Luffy, sweating just at the thought of the infamous sea. Sure, but it's not as bad as the New World. It's only bad if you don't know what you're doing, Luffy said with a nonchalant shrug. The New World. Luffy-san, sometimes I forget you've sailed the Grand Line before, Kobe said, wilting as he remembered that small fact. Yes, it can't be helped, Zoro said, leaning back in his chair with a grin, prepared to take on whatever challenges they faced. Not you too, Zoro-san. Kobe moaned out, sweating again. What's it matter? You're not going, are you? Zoro asked the pink-haired kid, wondering why he was getting so worked up. And no, but I'm worried about you. Is that so wrong? Kobe asked with a frown. Luffy-san and I haven't known each other long, and I was a bit scared of him when I found out he was 11,097, but we are friends. Right, Kobe asked as if he'd overstepped a boundary and was worried what Luffy would say in response. Yeah, we're gonna part ways, but we'll always be friends, Luffy said with a wide smile. Kobe looked surprised at his words for a moment before he smiled to the ground. Since I was a little kid, I've never had friends. Much less anyone who would fight for my sake, he said softly. But more than anything, I never tried to fight for anything. He continued, everyone watching him in silence. But you two taught me how to live for my beliefs. I've decided to make my childhood dream come true. I want to join the Navy. Kobe finished, holding his fists up in determination. Shouldn't you be more worried about yourself, then? Zoro asked. Even if you were just a chore boy, you did spend 2 years on Alvida's pirate ship, Zoro said, having heard about how Kobe had come to join Luffy on this journey while they were eating. Don't underestimate the Marines' info-gathering skills. If they find out about that, you'll never get to join. Zoro said as if it were obvious. Kobe stared with wide eyes, realizing this as well. And now that you mention it. Pardon me. The door opened, cutting Kobe off, and they looked to see a crowd of Marines standing at the door, one of them walking into the room with them. You're 11,097, Monkey D. Luffy, correct. And you've joined him, Pirate Hunter Zoro? The Marine asked, arms behind his back as he stood tall. Yup, Luffy responded, eyeing the man and wondering what he would do about it. The Marine was confident in himself, but his emotions didn't give way to what he was planning on doing, which made Luffy weary. He wasn't exactly on friendly terms with the Marines after all. We appreciate that you saved our base and this town from that tyrant. However, now that we know both of you are confirmed pirates, in the name of the Marines, we cannot stand by quietly. He said, people crowding at the window to see what was going on. Luffy and Zoro stood, the two of them ready to fight if necessary, and the Marine looked to them rather than at the ground as he'd been doing before. You will leave this town at once. Out of obligation, we will refrain from contacting headquarters of the fact that there is a so-called former Whitebeard pirate forming his own crew. He said to them, Luffy feeling the month's resolve. Hey, Marine guy, how can you talk like that? Even you guys were subdued and terrified of Morgan. We owe these people our lives. Yeah. The people outside all began shouting in outrage, all of them feeling strongly that what the Marine had said was wrong. Rika was frowning in worry, but neither she nor her mother said anything as they watched on. Luffy, who had had a blank face this entire time, grinned. Well, guess we should go. Thanks for the food, lady. Luffy said, turning to address Rika's mother like Sabo had taught him, a bag of food hanging over his shoulder. He had left his other bag back on their ship. You guys are leaving already? Rika asked sadly. Yeah, Luffy said, nodding to her and beginning to walk out with Zoro. Aren't you part of their crew? The Marine asked Kobe, who had remained standing where he was. I'm. Luffy stopped in the doorway and frowned, head turned to Kobe as he took in the boy's nervousness, fear, conviction. He was about to walk out again when the Marine stopped him. Hold it. Well, is he? The Marine asked, and after a second of thought, Luffy grinned, turning to look at the Marine. I know what he's done until now, he said cheerily, feeling a bubble of betrayal coming from Kobe, but ignoring the ugly emotion as the boy turned to look at him in shock. There was this really fat pirate lady, I think her name was Ahiruda. Luffy began, arms stretched at his sides to try and imitate just how big the woman was while Zoro watched from the doorway. Luffy-san, Kobe said in shock, sweating. And she had this iron club. Man, she was an ugly hag. And for 2 whole years, this guy was her. Luffy, who had walked up beside Kobe and began poking the boy in the head, was cut off when Kobe's emotions suddenly grew stronger, a wave of fear and courage coursing through him as he turned and swung a punch into Luffy's jaw, shocking Rika and her mother, as well as the Marines. Realizing what he'd done, Kobe stared at Luffy in shock, noticing the teen was grinning. Now you've done it, you bastard. Luffy called, pulling back and returning a punch of his own. Damn you, damn you, damn you, Luffy shouted as he beat up the boy, grinning the entire time. Stop that, we won't allow you to cause any more trouble in this town. The Marine shouted, though he didn't make a move to stop Luffy. Oi, you've gone too far. That's enough, Zoro said, grabbing onto the back of Luffy's vest and pulling him away from the battered pink-haired boy who fell to the ground. It's very clear that you guys aren't crewmates. Now leave this town at once. The Marine shouted as he pointed at them. Luffy, still grinning, stood up and readjusted his straw hat on his head, leaving the building with Zoro. He could feel an understanding coming from Kobe, all feeling of betrayal leaving. Both Zoro and Luffy walked through the crowd outside and headed to the docks where their small boat was waiting for them, no one stopping them as they did. That was a pretty lame tactic. Wouldn't be surprised if they saw through it, Zoro said as they walked. Kobe'll handle the rest on his own. I just know it, Luffy said with a smile. As they got closer to the docks, the smell of the ocean got stronger, but with it, an underlying smell of tangerines and berry that made Luffy frown. Was that lady following them or something? It's a nice way to leave though. Being unable to turn back cause everyone hates you. It's pirate-like, Zoro said, interrupting Luffy's musings as they reached their boat. That's true, Luffy said, smiling and laughing as he forgot about his previous thoughts and removed the loop of rope holding the boat to the dock. Luffy-san. Kobe's scent drifted over to Luffy and both he and Zoro turned to find both the boy and Rika and her mother standing behind them. Seeing he had their attention, Kobe saluted them, standing up tall and straight as he did. Thank you, I'll never forget all you've done for me, Kobe shouted to them, Luffy and Zoro grinning as he did. I've never heard of a pirate being thanked by a marine, Zoro said, making Luffy laugh. Zoro's words reminded him of when he and his brothers had seen Garp again for the first time since they'd gotten out of the facility and how the man had thanked Whitebeard for rescuing them. Getting onto the boat and setting the sail, Luffy turned and waved to Kobe. Let's meet again sometime, Kobe, he shouted, watching Kobe as he continued saluting and Rika waved back. Bye, Rika shouted back, and Luffy could see Kobe's lips move, but couldn't hear what he said. All hands, salute. A crowd of Marines appeared behind the group and they all saluted as Luffy and Zoro drifted out of the docks and onto the sea. See ya, Luffy called with a laugh. Marines sucked, but those guys were okay. Slash backslash 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 slash backslash. Alright, our pirate crew finally set sail, Luffy said as he stood at the bow, Zoro smiling where he sat on the ground behind him. Looks like some pretty good adventure'll be waiting for us, Zoro said, Luffy feeling the man's happiness and excitement, matching his own. He laughed before staring at the ocean in determination. I will become king of the pirates, he said, voice tamer than it had been before. Zoro raised an eyebrow at that, leaning forward slightly. You really seem obsessed about this king of the pirates thing. Is there some sort of reason for it? He asked in curiosity. No reason, it's just. He trailed off, smiling fondly. It's just. Zoro prodded. I swore to a certain man that, someday I would gather a great crew, find the world's greatest treasure, and become king of the pirates. Luffy told him, remembering the promise to Shanks from so long ago, holding onto his hat that was on his head. This hat knows, he said, looking up to the sky now. I see, Zoro said with a smile, also looking to the sky. Alright, let's go. Set sail for the Grand Line. Luffy shouted into the sunset, laughing in excitement. Slash backslash 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 slash backslash. Some time had passed since they'd left the marine base island and Luffy was leaning over the side of their boat, stomach growling. I'm starving, he moaned out. When the hell are we gonna reach land? Zoro asked from where he sat. Who knows? We're just going with the wind and waves after all. I wonder if we'll reach land. Nah, I'm sure we will, sometime. Luffy moaned out, not moving from his spot over the railing. He could feel an annoyance rising in Zoro. Isn't it kind of weird that someone trying to be king of the pirates doesn't even have any navigation skills? Besides, I thought you were a part of the Whitebeards for a while. How didn't you pick up any navigating skills at all? Zoro asked, still not sure how he felt about that little tidbit. It was one thing to hear about pirates like the Whitebeards, but another completely to meet one of them. To have a former Whitebeard pirate as his captain was a bit daunting. It's not weird, I just drift around. And everyone back on the Moby tried to teach me how to sail and stuff, but I didn't get it. Sabo's better at understanding that kind of thing than I am, Luffy said, eyes trailing onto the boat towards where his bag sat, a mini den resting inside it, ready for him to pick up and call the Moby at any time. But anyway, aren't you a bounty hunter who wandered the high seas? Luffy asked as he now turned his head to look at Zoro, still dangling over the railing. I have no memory of ever calling myself a bounty hunter. I set off onto the sea in search of a certain man, but then couldn't get back to my village. I had no choice, so I just went after pirate ships to earn a living. He told Luffy, looking to the sky as he did. Oh, so you're just lost. Luffy deadpanned, feeling the irritation rise in Zoro at his words. Don't put it like that. Zoro shouted, kicking the boat and rocking it. The straw hat on Luffy's head bounced as the wind picked it up from off his head, and the trusty string Izo had tied to it unraveled for the first time in the 3 years since it had first been tied. In shock, Luffy watched as the hat began sailing into the air and towards the sails. It went up and over it, both Luffy and Zoro running over to the bow of the ship as they attempted to guess where it would land, and thankfully, Zoro was able to grab it out of the air right before it fell into the water. There was a joint sigh of relief as Zoro handed the hat back over to Luffy and he put it on his head again, frowning at the 2 untied strings. It came undone, he said with a small pout. What, it hasn't done that before? Zoro asked as he went to go sit back down. No, Izo tied it for me years ago and it was fine. Luffy whined as he went to join Zoro on the ground. So just re-tie it, Zoro said with a shrug, not seeing why it was a big deal. Luffy frowned again at that, holding the hat in his hands now as he examined the strings. You can tie it again, can't you? Zoro asked with a raised eyebrow. Luffy looked up at him with wide, unblinking eyes, before grinning and laughing sheepishly. Gimme that, Zoro said with another irritated sigh as he held his hand out for the hat. Luffy looked between Zoro's hand and then his hat for a minute before conceding and handing the precious item over. Geez, you can't navigate, and you can't tie knots. What can you do? Zoro asked as he tied the two strings together, Luffy watching his every move carefully. Fight. Oh, and eat, Luffy exclaimed with a grin, making Zoro roll his eyes as he handed the hat back over to its owner. Thanks, Zoro, he said with a wider smile than before, putting the hat on his head and looking at the two, once again, tied strings. So that hat's pretty important to you then, huh? Zoro asked as he observed how careful Luffy was with the object. Yeah, Luffy said as he pulled on the edges of it. There was a brief moment of silence before Zoro asked something that had been bugging him for a while. So you're 11,097, then? That kid who escaped a mental hospital a while ago and has a bounty of 350 million? He asked. Everyone had heard about it, even him seeing as he'd made a living off turning in pirates. He'd seen Luffy's bounty poster a few times but hadn't gone after him seeing as he stayed strictly within the East Blue. Back when the news of numbered children having escaped was big, even he had been suspected of being one of them until the Marines checked his wrist and found no such number. Looking at his new captain, the tattooed number on the inside of his wrist practically confirmed him of being the kid in question. Yes. Wait, no, Luffy said, confusing Zoro. Yes or no? He asked, wondering how Luffy could get confused. It had been a simple question. Yes, I am 11,097, but I didn't escape a mental hospital. That's just what the Marines told everyone to. What did Ace and Sabo say? Save feet, Luffy asked, trying to remember how his brothers had phrased it. Zoro looked at him, his confusion clear on his face before he realized what Luffy might be trying to say. Save face? He asked, Luffy grinning and nodding. Yeah, that. It wasn't a mental hospital we escaped, it was a facility. Luffy said as if it were obvious. A facility? Zoro questioned, making Luffy frown as he realized this was probably going to keep happening. Every time he got a new crew member it would be natural for them to wonder about the things Marines had said about him, and he didn't want them to have any misconceptions about him. It didn't mean it wasn't annoying though. A facility is a government-run place. Ace, Sabo and I all escaped it after we were held there for 7 years. It's a bad place, Luffy said, his voice dark as he explained it to his swordsman. What's so bad about it? Zoro asked, wanting to know more. He didn't like the sounds of it already, and from the looks of it, Luffy didn't like the memories of it, but he couldn't help but be curious. Everything about it is bad. I'm not some crazy kid that the Marines were trying to help, and neither are the other kids who got out. We escaped, and the Marines were scared we'd say something so they tried to get us all back, but they couldn't cause the Whitebeards help us stay safe. That's what Sabo said anyways. I didn't pay a lot of attention to what the Marines said in the papers about us. Luffy said, looking back to the sky. Zoro realized he probably wasn't going to get anything more out of his captain on that subject, so he dropped it, trusting that his captain wasn't actually crazy like the Marines said he was. Maybe he only did that because he was going to be sailing with the man from now on and he didn't want to admit he may have intentionally agreed to follow a mentally unstable person. So you were a part of the Whitebeard pirates, then? He asked instead, Luffy's somber mood lifting as he grinned again. Yeah, it took us a month after the facility, but we joined them because they're good guys. Luffy said with a laugh, his words holding more weight than Zoro was realizing. And Whitebeard just let you leave to start a crew of your own? The swordsman asked, finding it a bit hard to believe, but Luffy laughed again. Yup, Pops said he didn't care what I did, as long as I was happy. Everyone really wanted me to stay with them, but I'd promised I'd be king of the pirates, and I couldn't do that being a part of someone else's crew. Luffy said to Zoro who smiled, agreeing with Luffy's words. A stomach rumbled and Luffy moaned, remembering how hungry he was. Man, I'm hungry, he groaned as he held his stomach and looked to the sky again. Zoro sighed, having heard this multiple times already and wondering how the teen could be hungry after eating everything they had only a little while ago. Not to mention the large amount of food he'd eaten back on the Marine base island. A bird, Luffy said, making him look up to see what his captain was seeing. A grin spread across Luffy's face as he looked to Zoro. Let's eat it, he exclaimed. Huh, how? Zoro asked, the bird having been high up in the sky. Leave it to me, Luffy said as he stood and stretched his arms back, flinging them forward and grabbing onto the rigging. Gum gum rocket. With that, the teen launched into the sky, straight towards the bird in question. I see, Zoro said with a raised eyebrow, having forgotten about Luffy's devil fruit. He watched as his captain grew smaller as he got higher up before he stopped, level with the bird. He squinted, wondering how his body was lower than the bird's, yet he wasn't moving down anymore. Help, Luffy's voice called, and it was then he realized his new captain was caught in the bird's mouth. Moron, what the hell are you doing? Zoro shouted as he began rowing as fast as he could. Slash backslash slash backslash slash backslash slash backslash slash backslash slash backslash slash backslash. Luffy watched as the sea drifted by below him, the bird not stopping as it continued flying. He remained still and allowed himself to be carried, a bored look on his face as he waited for something to happen. Finally, after a few minutes of the bird flying, Luffy saw an island below them and grinned. "Oi, bird, let me down now," he shouted, becoming annoyed quickly when he still couldn't get his head unstuck from the bird's mouth. Try as he might though, it was for naught, legs flailing as he tried pulling the bird's mouth open. They were midway over the island when Luffy saw something heading their way and he began flailing harder. "Bird, bird, let me down," he shouted, but it was too late as a cannonball hit them, exploding and forcing the bird to let go of Luffy. He screamed, flailing as he began plummeting to the ground, and before he knew it he was crashing into the stone pavement, a giant dust cloud forming. What? A woman's voice asked in surprise, Luffy vaguely noting that familiar scent of tangerines and berry was back. "What the?" Another voice asked, this time a male. "A person fell from the sky," another man said in shock. "Damn it, what are cannonballs flying at me for?" Luffy asked in annoyance as he stood from the ground, the dust cloud dissipating around him. "But now I'm safe. That was a pretty neat experience that I had," he said, holding onto his hat as he looked around, taking in the shock and surprise surrounding him. There were 3 guys behind him, most likely pirates by their looks, and in front of him was the woman that had continued popping up wherever he went. "Hey, you, have you been following me?" Luffy accused as he pointed to the red-haired girl who was staring at him in shock. There was a moment where the girl was confused by his words, before she was suddenly confident, a grin forming on her face. "Of course boss, I've got the map as promised. Sorry, but I've gotta go now," she said to him, running off before Luffy could ask her any more questions. "Hey, the girl got away. That's okay, her boss is still here. Aw, try and talk cover for your crony, huh?" Luffy turned, still confused as to what was happening. His stomach growled and he held it with a frown. "Say, is there any place to eat around here?" Chapter 4, Nami, the thief that steals from pirates. "Say, is there any place to eat around here?" Luffy asked, holding his stomach as it rumbled. After all the work he'd gone through to get that bird, and here he was, still without food. "Quit screwing around, kid," one of the men in front of him shouted, swinging a fist in an attempt to punch him. Luffy was warned by both his haki as well as the man's sudden anger and was able to easily bend out of the way, the punch gliding safely over him. The fist went a little too far forward, however, and the man's hand collided with Luffy's hat, sending it flying back. Luckily, the string Zoro had retied earlier for him kept it from falling off, instead lightly tugging around Luffy's neck as it attempted to fall, but failed. Anger overtook Luffy as he straightened again, placing the hat back onto his head as he glared at the man who'd hit it. "Don't touch my treasure," he shouted, reeling back his own fist back and punching the man, sending him flying. "Bastard," the 2 others shouted in unison, pulling out sabers and running towards Luffy. "Gum gum pistol," Luffy called, sending both of his fists forward and hitting the 2 before they reached him. The 2 fists landed squarely on their faces, knocking them both out and sending them crumbling to the ground. Luffy watched them a second, taking in the mutedness of their emotions until he was satisfied that they were down for now. A breeze blew past him and he smelled that ever-present smell of berry and tangerines that had been following him constantly, and he turned his head to look towards where the smell was coming from. On top of the roof of the building beside him, he saw the orange-haired girl from before peeking down at him with wide eyes. She'd had a bit of worry in her, but once she saw the 2 knocked-out thugs, she calmed, and instead, greed filled her. "Wow, you're really strong," she called to him once she noticed he had spotted her. She jumped down to the balcony of the building while Luffy continued staring, still not sure how he felt about the woman. "You beat people with sabers barehanded," she elaborated. "You never answered my question from before," Luffy told her, ignoring the other comments because he was still curious about whether this woman was following him or not. Had the Whitebeards sent her to watch him? He didn't know how likely that was. They knew how much he didn't want help or assistance, but he also knew how worried they all were about him. "What do you mean?" she asked in confusion, remembering that the teen had asked her something, but she'd been too caught up in getting away from the pirates that she hadn't really been listening. "Are you following me?" Luffy clarified, crossing his arms over his chest as he eyed her. She furrowed her eyebrows at him and put her hands on her hips. "Following you? We've never met before, why would I follow you?" she asked, wondering how he'd come to that conclusion. "You were there at that lady pirate's ship, Alduma, and then again at that marine base island," Luffy told her, only confusing the woman further. He hadn't felt any lies from her previous statement, but she also hadn't denied following him yet either. "Alduma, do you mean Alvida? You were there too? In the marine base island, wait, are you following me?" she asked in irritation. Luffy could feel that this woman clearly hadn't known he'd been at the same places as him, so he smiled. "Nah, never mind. Anyways, who are you?" he asked, previous misgivings gone now as he realized it really had just been a coincidence. "I'm a thief who steals from pirates." My name's Nami, what about you? She asked, leaning forward on the balcony railing as she officially introduced herself. Luffy could feel a bit of cautiousness in Nami, telling him that she wasn't as comfortable around him as she'd been moments ago, but he had just told her they were at the same places at the same time and apparently he'd been the only one to notice. I'm Monkey D. Luffy, nice to meet you. He greeted with his D smile. He could feel a recognition now, but also a turmoil like she didn't know how she recognized it. Monkey D. Luffy, that name's familiar, but why? She asked, more to herself than to Luffy. He was about to answer her when his stomach growled again, reminding him once more of his hunger. Oh, I just remembered. I'm starving, he said as he held his stomach. Nami was snapped from her musings at Luffy's words and she jumped down from the balcony. Why don't I treat you to some food? She asked with a smile, and even though she was still wary of Luffy, he could feel that she wasn't as cautious as before. Really? Luffy asked as he beamed at her, shocking her with his sudden enthusiasm. Why yeah, she replied, stepping away a step at how eager the teen was. Yosh, let's go, Luffy cheered, letting Nami walk in front of him to lead the way. They walked down the street, neither of them talking as they did, and eventually they stopped in front of a house, Nami letting them in. Luffy was quick to beeline to the table, sitting while Nami went to the fridge and began digging around in it. Soon enough, a sandwich was placed in front of Luffy and he ate it all in one bite, Nami watching with slightly wider eyes than normal from where she sat on the edge of the table. Yum, do you live alone in this house? Luffy asked, looking to Nami as he spoke. I don't live in this town. Everyone here ran away because of Buggy. She told him, eyes still wide, and Luffy felt no lies from her statements. Then you're a sneak thief. How rude, Nami exclaimed indignantly. I'm a thief who only steals from pirates. Don't compare me to scumbag sneak thieves. She chastised, clutching a roll of paper tightly in her hand. But a thief's a thief, Luffy said plainly despite the woman's irritation. My goal is to earn 100 million berries, no matter what it takes. She said, looking off towards the wall and standing up straighter. What do you need that much for? The straw-hatted teen asked because 100 million was a lot of money. It's a secret, but with a map of the Grand Line, 100 million is a real possibility. She said, turning away from Luffy who began eating from the basket of bread on the table. He looked to the woman's back, feeling that deep hatred rumbling in her from before, but he couldn't figure out what it was directed towards. Normally, it was easy to figure out who people were directing their emotions towards. Luffy didn't exactly know how he did it, but it was like a sixth sense. When someone felt love, he could feel that it was directed towards their child or happiness towards a gift. With Nami though, he couldn't feel that. The hatred she felt was tied into the words she was saying, and it definitely had something to do with this secret, but Luffy couldn't figure out exactly what it was. A map? Are you a navigator? Luffy asked after a moment of trying to decipher the mystery being presented to him but having no luck. Nami turned to face him, grinning again. Much more skilled than your average navigator. She boasted, Luffy feeling her confidence and believing her words. Oh, that's perfect. Do you wanna be our navigator? He asked, standing from his chair and smiling widely. Really? She asked, leaning forward on the table with a wider smile now. Yeah, our new pirate crew member. Luffy exclaimed, arms out wide in excitement. There was a sudden shift in the woman's emotions from greedy and happy to angry and hateful. No, she suddenly exclaimed, making Luffy frown. So you're a pirate? She asked, standing straight again. Yeah, I swore to the person who gave me this straw hat that I'd gather a crew and become a pirate. He said, smiling as he took his hat off and stared at it. Nami slammed her hands back on the table causing the plate on it to clatter and bounce. There's nothing I hate more in this world than pirates. I only like money and tangerines. She said fiercely, Luffy only frowning and blinking to her as he put his hat back on. The hatred was back again, stronger than before, and the truth in her words deterred Luffy from pushing the subject anymore. As much as he wanted and needed a navigator, he could feel just how much Nami despised pirates, so he wouldn't force her to join them. After all, if a doctor from the facility asked him to join them, he would adamantly refuse too. I should have known someone strong like you was a pirate. Just my luck, Nami said to herself as she gripped the map tighter in her fist, and then it slackened, her eyes widening. Wait a second. Monkey D. Luffy, as in 11097? She asked, finally recognizing the name now. She'd seen both the bounty poster and the news about the boy over the years, and it had still taken her this long to click the pieces into place. To be fair, however, the last report on 11,097 and his brothers mentioned that they had been deep into the Grand Line, so it wasn't as if she was expecting him to pop up here in the East Blue. Oh, you know me too? Luffy asked, sitting back down and resuming his eating. The fear and nervousness were beginning to be a usual occurrence now that Luffy was willingly outing himself to people in the East Blue, and he knew he should get used to it, but he couldn't. Know of you. Everyone knows about the kids that escaped from the mental hospital years ago. The Marines have been after you ever since, but you joined the Whitebeard Pirates. she exclaimed, standing a good few feet away from him now, eyes glancing to the door as she contemplated running out. It wasn't a mental hospital. Geez, does everyone think that? Luffy asked, stopping in his eating momentarily, annoyed that he had to keep correcting everyone. What do you mean? The news said. The Marines lied. My brothers and I escaped a facility, not a mental hospital. Pops saved us and kept us safe because the Marines tried taking us back. Luffy told her, resuming in his eating once more. Seeing that the teen wasn't attacking her, she calmed slightly, though she was still ready to bolt from the room at any second. Facility? She asked, curious. A bad place run by the government. We escaped and the Marines were worried we'd tell people about it, so they started trying to capture us all again. Luffy explained briefly, frowning as he ate. Nami said nothing now, trying to figure out if she was being lied to or not. Aren't you a Whitebeard pirate though? What are you doing in the East Blue? Whitebeard doesn't have any claim here. She said next, her body still tensed in preparation to flee. Luffy nodded in answer. I'm not here for Pops. I left the crew to start my own. He said, and even though Nami was curious about that, wondering if that was even allowed, she heard shouting outside. Walking over to the window still wary of Luffy, she peeked out and saw two of Buggy's goons standing on the street below, talking about her and how they'd yet to find her. Her eyes drifted back over to Luffy, who was finishing up the bread, and smiled, figuring out how she could use him to his advantage. The sudden greed from the girl overpowered her fear and nervousness as she walked back over to the straw-hatted teen. Well, I might consider joining as your navigator if you agree to consider conditions. Nami said cheerfully, grinning slyly as she did. Luffy could feel that there was a hint of truth to her words, but overall she was lying, like how Sabo taught him to tell half-truths to keep from being caught telling lies. The fact that she was willingly agreeing to join him after having so much hatred for pirates also confused him, but he decided to see where this was going. What are the conditions? He asked, watching the girl who faltered slightly under his gaze, her fear rising only slightly before being covered again by the greed. I want you to come with me to see Buggy the pirate. She started, still smiling, but it was smaller than before. Luffy could feel she wasn't lying, which only confused him more. But, she exclaimed, pulling out a rope and letting it unravel to the floor. She had Luffy stand, hesitating one more time, before tying the teen up who let it happen. Why am I tied up? He asked. It's just a rope. Is there a problem? She asked, sweating slightly the fear back again. Nope, let's go meet this Buggy guy. Luffy said with a smile, knowing the rope would be no issue if he needed to escape it. The two made their way through the town and straight towards the large mass of people that Luffy could feel. Once they reached it, a man dressed strangely walked over to a blue-haired guy and announced their arrival, the man's attention turning their way as they walked over to him. Luffy could still feel the greed in Nami, the small bit of fear and nervousness, but mostly the confidence as they paraded through the many pirates on either side of them. That's them. She's the one who stole the map. One of the pirates Luffy had beaten up earlier exclaimed, pointing to them. Nami, grinning, pushed Luffy forward. He fell, unable to catch his footing, and laid on the ground. I've captured the thief Buggy the clown. Here's your chart back, she said as she walked up to the man, holding the map in her hand. I appreciate it, but why the change of heart? Buggy asked from where he sat in his chair. Nami handed the map over before backing away back towards Luffy. My boss and I had a fight. I'm fed up with him. Please let me join your crew, she said with a smile, hands behind her back as she looked to Buggy. Despite how cheerful the orange-haired woman looked and sounded, Luffy could feel the tornado of contradicting emotions in her, and he wondered how she was able to act so well. Whenever he tried doing that, everyone always knew. Buggy began to curl in on himself and the surrounding pirates all became fearful and worried. See, Captain Buggy is getting angry. He's gonna use his devil fruit powers. Devil fruit, Luffy muttered as he watched, knowing that the man was actually amused rather than angry like the others had assumed. He was more focused on the fact that he apparently had a devil fruit. He hadn't expected that. Buggy suddenly started laughing loudly, the pirates around them letting out breaths of relief as he did, and Luffy could feel the relief in Nami as well despite the fact that she didn't show it. Fed up, huh? You're a flashily amusing girl. I like you. You can join my crew. Buggy said to Nami, the girl's smile changing into a softer look of the relief that she was feeling, and then gleeful. Immediately, Luffy was picked up by two nearby pirates, Buggy examining him. So this is your boss then, huh? Doesn't look all that weight. Buggy said, eyes widening in surprise and making Nami freeze. Monkey D. Luffy. Whitebeard pirate, 11,097, Monkey D. Luffy. Buggy asked, everyone turning to look at Luffy with wide eyes and dropped jaws. Nami looked nervously between Luffy and Buggy before forcing another smile. That's right, he left the Whitebeards and came here. He wanted a map of the Grand Line, so I agreed to get one for him, but as I said before, I got fed up with him and tricked him instead. Nami said, lying through her teeth. Buggy observed her for a minute before looking to Luffy. You left Whitebeard? He asked Luffy. The teen could feel Buggy's confusion and even fear but nodded. Yup, he said, not saying any more than that. he couldn't lie like Nami, so he would stick to the truth for now. Besides, he still had no clue what the redhead was up to. Silence reigned as everyone processed this new information, but eventually Buggy was grinning again. A bounty of 350 million berry and it's ours for the taking. Flashily appreciated girly, Buggy said to Nami, who grinned back. Put him in the cage. Careful though, his bounty is alive only. Buggy told the two pirates holding him up, and they nodded, pushing him into a stone cage nearby and locking it. Buggy stood from his chair, getting a closer look at Luffy and laughing maniacally. I feel great today, he said cheerfully. Turning to Nami, he addressed her again. Girly, what name do you go by? He asked. Nami, she told him. Buggy turned to the pirates around them, arms outstretched. Alright, let's hold a welcome party for Nami here. Celebrate flashily, he called, everyone cheering in excitement at his words. And party they did. Food was eaten, drinks were passed around, and the pirates entertained each other by running on barrels or juggling. Back at Buggy's seat, he sat and ate while Nami sat at a table in front of him. What's wrong? This party's in your honor. Eat up, Buggy told the girl, taking another swig of his drink. Yes, thank you, Nami agreed. Meanwhile, Luffy, who was forced to smell and look at the food so tantalizingly close to him, was stretching his arm out in an attempt to grab something to eat. Right before he could reach something though, his arm began snapping back to him, and he pouted at the unsuccessful attempt. Damn it, he said to himself with a sigh. At least the surrounding emotions were all happy ones. This is flashily great. Men, prepare a special Buggy ball. Buggy said with a laugh, everyone cheering as they began setting up a cannon. They pointed it just beside Luffy's cage, and a pirate with a red cannonball with a skull on it loaded the cannon with a grin. All set, sir, the man called to Buggy, who stood nearby with a grin. Nami was watching with a small look of worry, glancing to Luffy, who was watching it all as well. What's about to happen? She asked Buggy. Observe the might of the Buggy ball. Buggy told her before ordering the cannon to be lit. The pirate did so, and within seconds the cannon was going off with a loud boom, the cannonball practically whistling through the air before it busted down a whole row of houses. The pirates cheered and laughed while Nami gaped in shock. Truly flashy. With Buggy balls and devil fruit powers, I can conquer the Grand Line. Right, Nami? He asked, turning to look to the girl, who composed herself, smiling to him and nodding. Why yes, of course, she agreed with a small laugh. I'm the one who's gonna rule the Grand Line. Luffy suddenly said, drawing everyone's attention. What? Buggy asked. I'm gonna be king of the pirates. Luffy told him, face blank and void of emotion as he spoke. You idiot, Nami said in anger while Buggy seethed. I can see why you're sick of him, Nami. The pirate said, Nami laughing nervously again and pointing to the teen in the cage. Yeah, he takes the world too lightly and misunderstands everything. I couldn't put up with it anymore. She laughed. Naturally. Buggy agreed. If it weren't for his bounty being alive only, I'd flashily have you use a Buggy ball on him right here and now. Buggy said, Luffy still feeling the anger in the man. Nami faltered at the words but was relieved she didn't actually have to do that. Start the party up again. Buggy called, everyone cheering once more as they did just that. Nami sighed in relief while Buggy went to sit back in his chair. Glancing around quickly, Nami made her way over to Luffy's cage, crouching beside him. Idiot, don't anger him, she hissed, making sure no one was paying attention to them. As much as she hated pirates, she didn't want to be a part of anyone's murder today. Why? Luffy asked dumbly. Nami frowned at that. Because he could kill you, she said angrily. That's what happens when you take on pirates, Luffy told her matter-of-factly, making her glare at him. What? Kill people like it's nothing, she hissed, only getting more and more annoyed as the conversation went on. No, you have to have the resolve to put your own life on the line, he told her with a grin. Her scowl faded, instead making her frown. What are you doing over here? Come on, join the party, one of the pirates said with a laugh as they pulled Nami up from where she was, dragging her back into the party. Luffy watched her carefully, but he wasn't worried, not when he could smell a familiar scent of steel and polish heading their way. It was only a few more minutes later that he could see Zoro walking over to him. Zoro, he called with a giant smile. The man looked to him, taking in the fact that he was both tied up and in a cage. How'd you find me? Luffy asked, tilting his head as he asked, the pirates around them slowly realizing that Zoro was there. What do you keep playing around for? First, some bird runs off with you, and now you're inside of a cage. Zoro asked with a raised eyebrow, one sword over his shoulder. It's pretty interesting, actually, Luffy said as if they weren't surrounded by pirates. Zoro. That's what he just called him, right? The pirates asked amongst each other. So you're Zoro. What do you want? Are you here to take my head or his? Buggy asked with a grin as he stood back up. Neither. I'm not interested. I gave up pirate hunting, Zoro said, not even looking at Buggy as he stood in front of Luffy's cage. I'm interested, though. Killing you will increase my fame, Buggy said. This time Zoro looked over his shoulder at the man, glaring. I wouldn't try it. You'll die, Zoro said to him. Oh, that's so. Buggy asked as he began flipping a knife in one hand and held 4 others between the fingers of his other hand. Zoro sighed. Guess words aren't enough for you, he said, the pirates cheering around them. Yet, I am, Captain. Captain Buggy. 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 The two prepared to fight, Zoro placing a sword in his mouth while Buggy removed the big orange cape he'd had draped over his shoulders. Within a matter of seconds, Buggy began charging at Zoro, but the swordsman didn't move, instead moving into another stance. Die flashily. Buggy didn't even hit Zoro as the swordsman sliced the pirate's limbs off, the pirates cheering as he did and Nami looking away. Luffy watched with a frown, noticing that despite the fact that the man was lying in pieces on the ground, Buggy was feeling no pain and he wasn't unconscious either. He had no resistance to him at all. Zoro said as he sheathed his swords and walked back over to Luffy's cage. He's not down yet, Zoro, Luffy said, still frowning as he stared at the pirate captain. The green-haired man raised an eyebrow, also looking to the man again. What do you mean? He looks pretty down to me, he said, but as he did the surrounding pirates began laughing ominously at them. Zoro eyed them shiftily and unsheathed one of his swords again, eyes glancing back to the captain. Their captain's been killed, but they're laughing. Nami asked from a few feet away, watching in confusion. Zoro was about to ask what was so funny when he saw Buggy begin moving out of the corner of his eye, the man reassembling as if he hadn't been cut in the first place. One of the hands didn't reassemble though and instead shot right at him. Thanks to his fast reflexes, Zoro blocked the attack with his unsheathed sword. His arm, Nami said in shock, hands to her mouth and pale as she watched the disembodied arm fly back to Buggy and replace itself. The Bara Bara no Mi. That's the name of the devil fruit I ate. I'm a chop person who can't be cut. Buggy exclaimed, the pirates cheering again at his words while Buggy laughed. His body reattached itself. Nami said, a chop guy, you mean he's a monster? Luffy asked, despite the fact that he himself was a rubber person with heightened sense of smell and the ability to see people's souls and feel their emotions. Oh, and he could see their memories too. Buggy, 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 the pirates chanted, throwing their fists and swords in the air as they did. Attacking from behind is unfair. Big nose, Luffy shouted to Buggy, annoyed that the man had attempted to stab Zoro in the back. Everyone blanched around him at his words, the pirates frozen in shock and fear. Who's got a big nose? Buggy shouted in anger, detaching his arm again and sending both it, and the knife it held, towards Luffy despite the alive-only bounty. Luffy, Zoro shouted as he tried intercepting the knife, but not making it in time. It didn't matter though because the team caught the knife between his teeth, glaring at the blue-haired clown and biting down, destroying the knife. Buggy, I will kick your ass, he said, glare turning into a grin at the thought. Buggy began laughing again at that, confidence filling him. Kick my ass. You're a real riot. You're stuck in a cage, and I'm going to kill Zoro here, you know. I'd kill you too if it weren't for your bounty being alive only. How should I have my ass kicked in this situation? Buggy asked, the pirates laughing at his words. It's no use, it's all over. Nami said to herself in worry, sweating a little. I refuse to die. Luffy exclaimed before laughing, Buggy watching in surprise. Run, Zoro. Luffy shouted to the swordsman, Zoro looking at him in shock. Wait, he came here to save you. What are you gonna do? Nami said, confused why Luffy would want the only help he had in this situation to leave him. Luffy only continued grinning to Zoro, understanding slowly morphing onto the man's face. Understood, Zoro said. Nami tilted in shock and Buggy flew into a rage. Impudent fool. As if I'd let you escape. He screamed, jumping at Zoro and forcing the swordsman to block his quick attacks. Buggy gained some ground on him, but then Zoro crouched, cutting Buggy's torso from his body before jumping through him and running the opposite way. Fool, your three-sword style has no effect on Hay. Listen when people are talking. Buggy shouted over his shoulder as he noticed that Zoro wasn't listening anymore and instead running right for the cannon. Getting underneath of it, Zoro pushed it up, flipping it around to face Buggy and his gang. Nami ran up to Zoro, swiping up the matches from the pirate that had lit the cannon earlier. Oh crap, the cannon's pointed this way. The pirates shrieked. Light it, Zoro told Nami, noticing the matches in her hand. Alright, Nami said, sparking one of the matches. Wait, there's still a special Buggy ball in there. Nami, I thought you were on our side. Buggy shouted. Ignoring the words, Nami lit the fuse, only making Buggy's eyes bulge in both rage and fear. You lit it, he shouted. Wait, no, stop, the other pirates shouted, Nami covering her ears and shutting her eyes. Slash backslash slash backslash slash backslash slash backslash slash backslash slash backslash slash backslash. Luffy laid down in the cage, staring blankly ahead of him. Nay, Zoro, that was a close one, Luffy said, his swordsman carrying his cage on his back and taking them through the town. How'd you know he wasn't down yet? Did you know about his fruit? Zoro asked as he struggled to carry the cage, the process slow going. I felt it, Luffy said as if it was something everyone could do. Felt it. Never mind. Who was that girl anyway? He asked him next, deciding that his captain was weird in more ways than one. Oh, she's our navigator. Luffy said with a smile, which quickly turned into a thoughtful look. At least, I think so. She said she would be. He said, still confused by Nami agreeing to be a pirate after telling him how much she hated them. That's some good news at least. Another crew member and we'll actually get to islands. Zoro said, stopping in front of a store where a dog sat. What's with this dog? Zoro asked after he set the cage down in front of the animal. Dog, Luffy exclaimed happily, grabbing onto the bars and sticking his head out at it. He began moving the cage forward by rocking it back and forth, slowly making it move. The dog stared at him, and he stared back for a minute before pulling his face and trying to make it react. Nay, Zoro, this dog's not moving at all. Luffy told his swordsman who moved to sit on the step of the store they were in front of. Hell if I care, it can do what it wants. Zoro said as he rested, tired after carrying his captain through the town in a stone cage. I wonder if it's dead. Luffy said, still grinning as he looked back at the dog. He stuck his hand out, poking it on the head, and the animal immediately lunged toward him, biting his face. OWW. 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 What are you doing, stupid dog? Luffy shouted, struggling to get the dog off his face while Zoro stared in shock. Do you know the situation we're in right now? Zoro shouted in annoyance. Ignoring the swordsman, Luffy finally managed to get the dog to let go of his face, the animal returning to its previous spot and sitting, unmoving once more. Damn dog, Luffy muttered, laying back in his cage. Nami's scent wafted over to him and he sat up, turning to watch the woman walk towards them. Heya, navigator. He greeted her. I guess you can have this since you did get me out of that situation. She told him, tossing Luffy the key to his cage with a nervous smile, a fear in her that she hid well. The key landed in between Luffy and the dog and he grinned. Oh, the key to the cage. You went and got it for me. He asked Nami with a smile. Don't get the wrong idea. I just didn't want to wind up owing you. She said with a hand on her hip. Zoro smiled, watching as Luffy went to grab the key. I'm saved. The team cheered, but right as he was about to pick it up, the dog did instead, swallowing it. Nami's sweat dropped, Zoro's eyes widened, and Luffy became furious. Stupid dog, you ate the key. That's not food. Gimme it back, Luffy said, reaching to grab the dog but being stopped by the bars. He frowned, taking deep breaths before sighing. Oh well, he said, making both Zoro and Nami look at him. Oh well, they asked, wondering if Luffy understood the situation he was in or not. I'll just break the cage, Luffy said with a shrug as if it were obvious, coating his hands in armament hockey and blasting through the bars, leaving the front of the cage wide open. Zoro and Nami's eyes widened and their jaws dropped. What the hell was that? Nami shrieked in surprise, not having been expecting that strength. She should have known though, the teen was a notorious pirate after all. You could do that the whole time, you ass? Zoro asked, having half the mind to slice his captain up right there and then. He'd just lugged both Luffy and the cage through the town, and it turned out it hadn't been necessary in the first place. Luffy stepped out of the cage, laughing. Shishishi. Yup, he said, hands on his hips as he grinned his D-grin at the swordsman. Hey, you youngins, a new voice shouted, distracting them. Who are you, old man? Zoro asked, his previous anger at Luffy fading as he addressed the new person. I'm this town's mayor. Who are you? The mayor asked as he walked up to them. He took in the scene before him, Luffy standing in front of a now destroyed cage and glaring at the dog, muttering about stupid dogs. He also noted that Zoro looked worn out and Nami still looked surprised. I take it Buggy went after you folks too? He asked, Zoro and Nami nodding while Luffy turned his attention back to the man. The dog yawned and the mayor looked back to him. Hello to you too, Chow Chow. He said with a smile, the dog barking at the mayor. So this dog's name is Chow Chow? Nami asked, getting over her surprise and kneeling down to pet the dog whose tail began wagging. What's it just sitting here for? Luffy asked, still miffed that the dog hadn't been all that nice to him. It's guarding the shop, the mayor started, telling them the story of Chow Chow's previous owner and how he'd owned the pet food shop behind them. He told them of his theory on why Chow Chow still stayed, how the shop had been his previous master's treasure, and by the end of it he was sitting beside Zoro, smoking his pipe while Luffy watched Chow Chow with a frown. No more could be said when a loud rumble shook the town and they all turned. What was that? Nami asked, the mayor shooting up from his spot. It's him, Beast Tamer Moji, he shouted, freaking out behind Nami. What do you mean, Beast Tamer? Nami asked, turning to the mayor, but the man was beginning to run off. Wait. Hold on, she shouted to him, but the man was already disappearing behind the houses, running into the alleys and leaving them behind. Nami let her outstretched hand fall, sweat dropping. Another rumble shook the ground and she turned to look at it, shuffling closer to Zoro and Luffy who were both looking towards the rumbling as well. Something's here, Zoro said, stating the obvious as he unsheathed his sword. Nami hid behind him while Luffy tilted his head, all of them watching as a large lion rounded the corner, a man riding on top of it as they stalked closer. "Who are you?" Luffy asked as the man and lion stopped in front of them. "I am Beast Tamer Moji, a member of the Buggy Pirates. I'm here to bring you back to Captain Buggy, 11,097, along with your friends Pirate Hunter Zoro and the thief, Nami.